Chapter 434. Father Wang's action actually wasn't a surprise, since Lai Mengmeng was already used to it. But this time, Lai Mengmeng hadn't expected Father Wang to personally use his author account to respond publicly. In Lai Mengmeng's view, this troll's card was pretty big. This time, he might really be immortalized. Lai Mengmeng felt that being a fan of Father Wang was actually a pretty happy thing. But a response was a response. In the end, this troll had written a 1,000-word-long review on a pirated website to attack Father Wang's work and his fans who liked it. How could you make this troll stop? Usually, the only way was to mobilize the power of the original readers to report him together. Father Wang hadn't even made any appeals, but the fans in the group were already riled up and spontaneously organized wave after wave of attacks to report Father Wang to customer service one after another. On the side, Lai Mengmeng sked repeatedly at this operation. This was a manifestation of fan cohesion. As a top guru on the website, Father Wang's fan group was naturally extremely cohesive. Father Wang looked at his watch. About 5 minutes later, he refreshed the webpage again, and all the trolls' comments, including the long review, had disappeared. Lai Mengmeng wiped at his sweat. It's all gone? That was too fast. Lai Mengmeng suddenly felt a little sorry for this troll. This guy didn't have enough IQ to begin with. He had rummaged through elementary school language books and painstakingly written a 1,000-word negative review, thinking that no one would pay attention to him if he posted it on a pirated software and could do whatever he wanted. In the end, he had been reported and deleted as soon as he sent it. Father Wang smiled calmly and took a drag on his cigarette. How far has he gotten? Believe it or not, he'll keep posting. He's courting death. Can he write so many words? Father Wang thought carefully and laughed. I'm guessing he's going to use the knowledge he learned in Peppa Pig as a child, Lai Mengmeng. After another half an hour, Father Wang refreshed the webpage again. Very good. Sure enough, this troll struggled to come up with another 200 words. The reply was as follows. First of all, I indeed don't have the financial ability to buy all the books. Rent in first-tier cities is too expensive, so I can only choose good books to buy. It's not realistic to buy all of them, but I'll also buy physical books if they're published, and I won't go around advertising pirated versions. You said the author singled me out? May I ask, how did the author know? Is the author also using pirated software? Or could it be that the true fans of the pirated software went to complain to the author? If it's the former, what right do you have to criticize me? If it's the latter, I can only say that the author is Lu Dongbin. After reading it, Lai Mengmeng scratched his head. What does he mean by that? Why does it feel like your logic is contradictory? Let me analyze it for you. Father Wang smiled and pointed at the screen as he analyzed it sentence by sentence. Look at his first sentence. He said, I indeed don't have the financial ability to buy all the books. Rent in first-tier cities is too expensive, so I can only choose the good ones to buy. The subtext was, you're blaming me for watching pirated versions because the rent is too expensive? That's why I scrimped and lived frugally to choose books to read, and all I read are the 4 great classical novels. Lai Mengmeng. Father Wang. Let's look at the second sentence. He says, how did the author know? Is the author also using pirated software? The subtext of the sentence was, I was caught off guard. I thought no one would see my ramblings. Since the fans of this book are all fake reviewers, then the author must have read a pirated version. Lai Mengmeng. The third sentence is actually the funniest one. If it's the latter, then I can only say that the author is really Lu Dongbin. Subtext. I am a dog. Lai Mengmeng snickered. After parsing these words, Father Wang stared at the screen and couldn't help tsking. This batch of trolls really have no standards. After saying that, Father Wang straightaway picked up the phone on the table and started to flip through the address book. Lai Mengmeng. Who is Brother Wang looking for? Father Wang replied lightly. Doctor. Lai Mengmeng. What for? Father Wang couldn't help laughing. You were bitten by a dog. You need to get vaccinated. Lai Mengmeng. Elsewhere, at the Cultivation Academy of Sciences Research Institute, the spatial assessment was ready. Wang Ming and grenade-throwing Senior Immortal were now in front of a giant eggshell-shaped glass dome, and they could clearly see a tiny space crack inside. This crack was not created by magic, but by the decomposition of space by modern technology. Brother Wang Ming, will this work? Grenade-throwing senior immortal asked curiously. Hands in his pockets, Wang Ming nodded confidently. Of course it won't be a problem. We've already tested this machine several times before, and its performance is up to standard. However, it does take a long time to warm up and start up. There's still room for improvement. Wang Ming then took out the tattered Taoist robe that Grenade-throwing senior immortal had brought, but just as he was about to approach the glass dome, Xiaofan stopped him. Let me do it. Xiaofan took a breath. Her tone as cold as usual. I've already tested it many times. There won't be a problem. Wang Ming really wanted to refuse, but his attitude wasn't as resolute as before, and he did his best to speak in a calm tone. Last time, he had used the heavenly material sword to brace himself to save that group of students in the hospital. Coupled with the excessive consumption from using the brain deduction technique, he had been in a coma for several days. Although he really didn't want to admit it, it was indeed Xiaofan who had stayed by his side to take care of him during those few days. Wang Ming wasn't stupid. He naturally knew that Xiaofan had designs on him, but he just couldn't figure out how he had provoked this female bodhisattva. No, Xiaofan said resolutely. Even if it's just a tiny space crack, if anything happens, you'll be cut to pieces right away. Wang Ming, you're exaggerating. Xiaofan folded her arms and looked at Wang Ming. Either you listen to me, or you stop the experiment. Wang Ming couldn't be bothered to argue any further, and directly chose to give up. Fine, fine, fine. I'll listen to you, big sister. After saying that, he handed the tattered Taoist robe to Xiaofan. Xiaofan took it with great satisfaction, and then went to operate the machine with ease. On the side, the young man in white was shocked when he heard this. Big sister? Wang Ming nodded and pointed at Xiaofan's back. That's right, this person who looks like a man is actually a big sister. Are you shocked? This big sister is a rare gem in our country's gender identification field. Hearing this, the corners of Xiaofan's mouth twitched. Grenade-throwing senior immortal whispered in Wang Ming's ear. Then, Brother Wang Ming, what's your relationship? Relationship? Wang Ming couldn't help laughing. Of course we're brothers. Hearing Wang Ming's words, Xiaofan couldn't help trembling. Chapter 435. It wasn't that Grenade-throwing senior immortal had heard of Wang Ming, but this was his first time meeting him. He had heard Wang Ling mention Wang Ming several times when they were chatting, and each time, there was an indescribable resentment in it. It was an indescribable feeling of love and hate. To be honest, Grenade-throwing senior immortal felt that Xiaofan was exaggerating a little. This was Brother Ling's cousin. Even if his cultivation wasn't as good as Brother Ling's, how bad could it be? Grenade-throwing senior immortal also hadn't sensed any aura from Wang Ming, but he felt that anyone who was related to Brother Ling definitely wasn't simple. Thinking about all the great seniors in the Wang family's small villa, even a single broccoli contained the most profound knowledge of heavenly Tao. To put it bluntly, they were all people who had cultivated for thousands of years. They had to have some sort of mental understanding of whether they had strength or not. Thus, Grenade-throwing senior immortal was a little displeased with Xiaofan's attitude. But he couldn't say anything, because he felt that these two people's current state was very much like the kind of couple who were flirting. Standing behind Wang Ming in the research institute, Grenade-throwing senior immortal deeply felt that there was an indescribable azure field between the two of them. It was very terrifying. Grenade-throwing senior immortal didn't even dare speak. He was actually a little afraid that a fourth person would suddenly jump out at this moment and yell something like, "I was clearly here first." But Wang Ming and Xiaofan were already used to this kind of situation. Considering Grenade-throwing senior immortal's presence, in the end, Wang Ming chose to alleviate this seemingly awkward atmosphere for the first time. He explained the procedure for the space assessment. There's no need to doubt the performance of this instrument. I've tested it many times. Do you see that fine, gossamer lead on the outside of the glass cover? I've defined this lead as a dimensional line. As long as we connect this dimensional line to the object being appraised, we'll be able to roughly determine the relevant data of this Taoist robe, including the remnant sword qi on it. We'll be able to precisely find the relevant dimensional coordinates. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at this scene with a slightly amazed expression. It wasn't that he hadn't heard of space tracking technology, but he had thought that it would probably be 100 years before it could be realized. But Wang Ming's strength was beyond his imagination. In theory, Wang Ming had already developed a prototype for a scientific instrument that could only be invented several hundred years later. Although there were indeed some shortcomings in the time it took for the machine to start up, this small flaw still couldn't overshadow Wang Ming's groundbreaking research in this field. On the other side, Wang Ling had finished reviewing all his homework for the current stage. Including the time he had spent scrolling through the news on his wristwatch, it took him less than 10 minutes to memorize all the important revision points for the midterm exam that Teacher Pan had talked about in class today. No matter what, learning was always the most important thing. There were even times when, in his eyes, even the monthly test was much more important than the 3,000 great spells. The reason was simple. This was because humans treasured the things that they had fought hard for. For Wang Ling, the 3,000 great Tao had been formed as his brain cells grew from a young age. The time he truly spent on cultivation was perhaps even less than the monthly exams. Putting down the revision materials in his hand, Wang Ling took a look at the messages. Whether it was the private chat window or the chat group, they were all empty. After all, it had been many years since Taoist Guang's tattered Taoist robe had been used. Wang Ling felt that it wouldn't be an easy task to rely on the wisps of sword qi left on the Taoist robe to track the corresponding space coordinates using a scientific instrument. But Wang Ling was very confident in this matter, because he knew that Wang Ming had already developed a relevant instrument to measure space. Perhaps this instrument wasn't in its perfect state, and was just a prototype. But Wang Ling believed that in today's world, if even Wang Ming couldn't do it, no one else would be able to. After finishing his homework, Old Man Wang called Wang Ling downstairs. Old Man Wang and Jiang Haifu, the head of Kitchen Knife Sect, who was also Wang Ling's grade classmate Jiang Bai's father, had previously arranged to have a cooking competition. Seeing that the appointed date was approaching, the old man had been working very hard these days to come up with a lot of new dishes, intending to show them off in front of Jiang Bai's father. Thus, Wang Ling had been summoned to try out the latest dishes. And this time, the old man had invented 2 brand new dishes. The old man was actually a very competitive person, especially when he was young. As long as it was a cooking competition, he would strive to be the champion. Now that he had lived for more than half his life, he had never failed in any cooking competition he had participated in so far. At the old man's insistent request, Wang Ling, Father Wang, Mother Wang and Loopy Toad were all called together. This Jiang Haifu is the head of Kitchen Knife Sect and one of the biggest leaders in the food and beverage industry today. Kikaro Restaurant is his family's business. Can you do it, Dad? Father Wang sat obediently at the dining table as he weakly voiced his doubts. He had been happily battling the troll just now and had sent his greetings to the troll's entire family. He had been planning to send his greetings to all 18 generations of his ancestors, but hadn't expected the old man to drag him downstairs. The old man held the iron ladle in his hand and knocked on the table forcefully. What's wrong? Are you looking down on me, an old employee of Kikaro Restaurant? In any case, I've been the head chef of Kikaro Restaurant's flagship store for more than 30 years, and I invented many of their dishes. Father Wang was speechless. Then at the dining table, everyone saw the old man lift the lid off the first dish. This was a pot of very thick broth. The broth looked very clear and overflowed with spirit power, which made people feel relaxed and happy just by smelling it. Father Wang couldn't wait to scoop up a spoonful of broth and drink it. In an instant, he actually felt his exhaustion sweep away. What kind of broth is this, Dad? Father Wang looked at the old man and felt that it was very magical. The old man pinched his beard and said with a smile, when dealing with extraordinary people, you naturally have to use extraordinary methods. You think this is just a pot of meat, but the meat inside is actually the internal organs of a spirit monkey. I was looking for this ingredient before, and I never thought that I would really find it through my friend. Listening, Mother Wang also took a sip of the broth and was full of praise. It's really delicious. Amazing, amazing. Father Wang couldn't help giving him a thumbs up. Then, Dad, how did you get the inspiration for these dishes? The old man looked at Father Wang. Cooking is actually the same as writing, it comes from life. 2 days ago, wasn't there a live streamer called Baboon who was banned? That was actually where I got the inspiration for this dish. I named it Baboon Head Soup. Wang Ling, Father Wang, then the inspiration for the second dish, Old Man Wang. The first dish was inspired by the legal system show PlayerUnknown's Battleground, Rise of the Baboon. The second dish, was inspired by the second episode of this legal system show PlayerUnknown's Battleground. Hit the snake 7 inches deep. Father Wong and Mother Wong. Old Man Wong. So, I named the second dish snakeskin soup. Chapter 436. Space assessment took some time, and after connecting the Taoist robe to the dimensional line, Xiaofan separated it from the Taoist robe after about 10 minutes, and returned the tattered robe to grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Because he had always thought that Xiaofan was a man, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wasn't used to changing the way he addressed her. Brother Xiaofan. Xiaofan stared at him, and the young man in white couldn't help wiping his sweat with the tattered Taoist robe. Well, Miss Xiaofan, what's the assessment result? Xiaofan replied indifferently. The dimensional line has already extracted the residual sword chi data from the Taoist robe, but it still needs time. The assessment report will come out in 24 hours. She stared at grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. You can leave today. I'll let you know if there's anything. On the side, Wang Ming frowned and couldn't help muttering. 24 hours? That long? That can't be. Xiaofan's gaze froze. I said 24 hours, so it's 24 hours. If you say any more nonsense, I'll smash this machine. The corner of Wang Ming's mouth twitched. Did you take the wrong medicine? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. For some reason, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sensed a very strange Azura field from these two people. But the young man in white could actually sense it, and could more or less guess why this Miss Xiaofan was so furious. At this time, there was no one else in the research institute except for Wang Ming and Xiaofan. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal seemed to have heard Wang Ming mention it before. This week, all the experts in the research institute except for him had been sent out to investigate, and it would take them 2 or 3 days to return. So, there was only one truth. He had become a third wheel. As great death-courting senior in the cultivation circle, the reason why he was so sought after by so many people wasn't just because of his chivalrous sense of justice, but also because of his EQ. Even in modern cultivation society, people without EQ couldn't survive. In this circle, it was very important to learn how to read a person's words from their body language. Looking at the look in their eyes, one could tell that there was definitely something going on between these two people. RBQ, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who was certain that he had disturbed their good time, could only laugh bitterly. Then Brother Wang Ming, I'll take my leave first today and wait for your news. Wang Ming, is that okay? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal shook his head. It's fine, it's fine. Brother Wang Ming and Miss Xiaofan are more important. Wang Ming. Ah. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal patted Wang Ming on the shoulder with an expression that said he had already seen through everything. I won't bother you any longer, but when Brother Wang Ming is doing something, it's best if you pay more attention. Wang Ming. Speaking up to this point, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal pulled Wang Ming to one side and said in a very low voice, I have a friend who didn't control his strength when he was doing something, and directly caused a magnitude 10 earthquake. Given Brother Wang Ming's realm, you'd better be careful when you're playing at the Research Institute. Wang Ming. Xiaofan. Standing at the entrance to the Research Institute, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help heaving a long sigh of relief back then. At the Wang family's small villa, old Senior Wang had put a broccoli in grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's bowl. Back then, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had already analyzed old Senior Wang's expression, and noticed that there was something unusual about that broccoli. And this time, he analyzed the unspeakable secret between the two of them with just one look. Oh my God! As expected, he was a little genius. At the same time, in another unknown space. This was a dark gray world. Even the clouds were dark gray, and it reeked of darkness. A young man with long black hair sat upright on a huge black boulder on the top of a craggy mountain. The corners of his eyes were heavily painted with eyeshadow, and the evil blue patterns on his face were extremely sinister, extending from his cheeks to the back of his neck. His style was full of evil. Immortal Jinyun, you can't fool me. The entrance to the treasure house is here. I also know that you're here. What? Are you not willing to come out and meet this junior? The evil young man closed his eyes and sneered. His voice wasn't loud, but it was extremely penetrating, and the whole world was filled with the echo of the young man's voice. This was a powerful sound wave spell. Spirit power surged out, and anyone below the soul formation stage wouldn't be able to withstand it at all, and would directly explode and die. The young man knew that there were no living creatures in this space, but he still did it on purpose. This was a provocation. And most importantly, the young man felt that when he spoke, there would be an echo, which would give him a very cool feeling. He, evil sword god, was a grand almighty, and he had to speak with vigor. However, after a long time, there was no response. He was very sure that immortal Zhenyuan was here. Even if he wasn't in this world, he was definitely monitoring this place. After about a minute, the young man felt spiritual pressure descend from the sky, which was accompanied by the power of a restriction. The young man sensed that his sound wave spell had been restricted. Immortal Zhenyuan, do you think you can restrict my echo like this? Can you restrict my echo now? Are you restricting my echo? Are you controlling my echo? Did you hear my reply? Did you hear back? My echo, my echo. Is it, immortal Zhenyuan? About 5 minutes later. In the next moment, evil sword god opened his eyes and looked at the sky. He couldn't help sneering in his heart. In this world, there's actually a junior who dares to use sword chi to track me? What a joke! Ever since he had mastered the power of sword Dao, he could clearly sense the network of sword chi, and the enormous grid of sword chi was as clear as a spider's web in his mind. Sword come! Evil sword god roared in his heart. With a wave of his hand, there was a hum as countless particles of light converged in the air to form a purple-black spirit sword in his hand. The number 1 sword on the spirit sword power ranking list, Heaven Cleaving. Holding Heaven Cleaving in his hand, evil sword god lightly slashed the air. Spirit power howled in the chaotic space, and a crack suddenly appeared. This was a space fissure which evil sword god had forcibly opened up with the power of sword Dao. He used it as a portal. As long as he had been to a place, he could use sword chi to split open a gap and come and go as he pleased. Evil sword god raised his head and laughed into the air. Immortal Zhenyuan, after I've dealt with this rude junior, I'll come back for you. This junior will 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 come back for you. You. After saying that, evil sword god raised his sword and stepped into the air fissure. Chapter 437. After leaving the research institute, grenade-throwing senior immortal tossed the spirit sword on his back aside and chose to fly it home. The sword on grenade-throwing senior immortal's back was called Brilliant Victory, which clearly meant ever victorious and brilliant. This sword hadn't been made by Fatty Luo, but had been passed down from grenade-throwing senior immortal's ancestors. It was usually in a sealed state with layers of seals wrapped around it like a rice dumpling, but it actually didn't affect its ability to fly a sword. At most, it looked a little worse for wear. Another pain in the ass point was that this spirit sword had been forged by a weaponsmithing master from out of town, so when grenade-throwing senior immortal had obtained it back then, the sword plate number of this spirit sword was from out of town. During the morning and evening rush hours, there was a flight restriction. But the timing was just right. If he took a spirit bus back, it would take up a lot of time. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had just jumped onto the spirit sword and was about to set off when he received a phone call. He looked at the caller ID. Cheat Master Reed. He hadn't typed it wrong. Was it Cheat Master Reed? Grenade-throwing senior immortal stared blankly at the screen. After touring Immortal Toya's Chrysanthemum Island, he had privately looked for this fortune-teller friend of his, Taoist Reed. People had given him the nickname Cheat Reed Master because his divination was as accurate as a cheat. Like Fatty Luo, this person wasn't in the chat group, but he was very good friends with grenade-throwing senior immortal. No matter what era it was, there were always mavericks. There were too many eccentrics in the cultivation circle to count. Some people didn't join the group, so there was no point in pulling them in. In the end, it was up to the individual. Who knew if one day they would feel lonely like Taoist Guang and want to join the group to chat every day? Grenade-throwing senior immortal pressed the answer button. On the other end of the line came Cheat Master Reed's voice with a slight local accent. Hey, fungus? Likely? Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Brother Reed, like me. As soon as he said this, the young man in white couldn't help stamping his foot. Every time he spoke to Cheat Master Reed, his accent would slip. Grenade-throwing senior immortal composed himself and asked, Brother Lu, is there any news about the divination I asked you to do? After leaving Chrysanthemum Island, he had looked for cheat Master Reed with the intention of telling immortal Toya's marriage fortune. However, marriage divination was what Taoist Reed hated the most. Not only did it take a long time to complete, but every person who asked for a marriage divination would also develop a kind of overconfidence after learning about the direction of their own marriage fate. So why were there so many straight men and straight women nowadays? Taoist Reed felt that he was partly to blame. Thus, if one were to ask Taoist Reed for a marriage divination, unless they were very good friends, they wouldn't accept this type of divination no matter how much money they were offered. Taoist Reed said, "Marriage divination. I'll have to wait for a while. It's not easy to do, but once it's done, it'll definitely be accurate." Grenade throwing senior immortal. "Then why did Brother Lu look for me today?" Taoist Reed. "Fungus, do you still remember the first few times you asked me to kill you? You gave me the 8 characters of your birth." Grenade throwing senior immortal nodded. That seems to be the case. But even so, it had been a long time, at least several hundred years. Grenade throwing senior immortal remembered that he had left the 8 characters of his birth for the sake of fortune-telling. Taoist Reed, on the other hand, had the habit of storing the information of his frequent customers for future use. Taoist Reed. "Last time, before I was helping Fungus's friend with his divination, I took the wrong 8 characters of his birth, and accidentally took them to be Fungus's. When I was done, I realized that something was wrong." Grenade throwing senior immortal frowned slightly. "Took the wrong one?" This was a fairly low-level mistake, and it was basically impossible for an experienced fortune-teller like Taoist Reed to make a mistake. Generally speaking, this kind of unintentional misreading of the 8 characters was usually a sign of something. Taoist Reed's thoughts were almost the same as Grenade throwing senior immortals. "I felt that this mistake might be some kind of sign, so I helped Fungus with his divination first. And the result? According to the divination, Fungus might be in for a bloody calamity. Great misfortune? Wrong. It seems extremely ominous. It seems to be an ominous divination of life and death." Grenade throwing senior immortal broke out in a sweat. "You didn't make a mistake, did you?" On the other end of the phone, Taoist Reed shook his head. "It can't be wrong. I did it 3 times. Originally, I had my suspicions that there might be a problem somewhere. Previously, I had helped Fungus Garlic calculate its fortune. Fungus Garlic would be blessed with a light of fortune for the next 1,000 years. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be too likely for such an inauspicious divination to appear. Furthermore, when I did the divination for the 2nd and 3rd times, I even used the Imperial Garlic Divining Magic Artifact." Taoist Reed was very confident in the accuracy of his divination. "This Garlic Divining Magic Artifact is amazing. So far, I've never failed with this magic artifact." "What kind of magic artifact is it?" "It's a magic sword called the Fortune Avoidance Sword. This sword can predict misfortune, but not fortune. If the divination is steady and auspicious, the magic sword won't move at all. The more ominous the divination, the more the sword will tremble. When I tested it on Fungus today, it was like a vibrator with the highest gear on." Grenade throwing senior immortal. "Then, Brother Reed, do you have a way to break it?" Taoist Reed sighed and looked a little embarrassed. "If it's very ominous, I have a way. As for extremely ominous, Fungus brother, there's something I don't know if I should say." Grenade throwing senior immortal. "Brother Reed, please speak your mind." Taoist Reed. "Fungus, please pay me for the garlic divination right away." "You can go in peace, Empress Lon. I'm afraid if you delay any longer, I won't be able to receive it." Grenade throwing senior immortal. After the call ended, Grenade throwing senior immortal stared at the screen and sank into deep thought for a long time. To be honest, it wasn't that he didn't know what extremely ominous meant. This was a divination of imminent disaster. Generally speaking, this kind of divination was no different from receiving a notice of critical illness in the hospital. But no matter how he thought about it, Grenade throwing senior immortal couldn't understand why he was suddenly facing imminent disaster. No. If that was the case, he couldn't go back yet. Once an extremely ominous divination was divined, it would come true within 24 hours. Furthermore, the ominous scent would spread to the surroundings. If he went home at this time, even little Silver might be implicated. What should he do? Should he go look for Brother Ling? Just as he was about to make a call, there was a whoosh. At that moment, a streak of sword chi actually attacked him from afar. This sword chi was a warning, and it brushed past Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal's ear at an extremely fast speed as it swept away a few strands of his black hair. Who was it? Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, looked in the direction the sword chi had come from. In the moonlight, he saw a very evil-looking young man standing on a high street lamp and staring at him with a dark expression on his face. The young man sneered and said indifferently, "I am evil sword god. Sword god. God." Chapter 438. Under the street lamp, that very evil young man introduced himself in a very Chuyuni tone. When Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, heard this, he couldn't help blurting out, "Psycho." There was something very wrong with this guy. Maybe he was a mental patient who had escaped from some mental hospital? The true monarch's mind was filled with endless wild and fanciful thoughts. He didn't dare to let his guard down, because even though the young man maintained a distance of 30 meters from him, the evil aura made him instinctively feel a sense of oppression. The young man in white subconsciously gripped the brilliant victory sword, and realized that his hand was actually trembling. Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, couldn't help breaking out in a cold sweat on his cheeks. This was the first time he had ever trembled from the depths of his soul. Letting a patient with a mental illness like this run around on the streets was bound to cause a riot. Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, felt that perhaps he should take this person back to the hospital. But very quickly, he changed his mind and suddenly recalled the Taoist name this evil young man had used to introduce himself. Evil sword god. Sword god. God. Holy shit. This guy is evil sword god. Because of the evil young man's convulsive self-introduction, it took Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, a long time to react before he realized what was going on. But why had evil sword god suddenly appeared here? Gritting his teeth, Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, raised his head again to look at the street lamp where evil sword god had been standing, but he had already disappeared. In the next moment, a hand was already on his shoulder, and a voice filled with fear from the depths of his soul rang out. "Looking for me? This speed? Was this a teleportation spell?" Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, turned his head in bewilderment, and only saw half of this evil young man's sinister smile. "Bold Jr., you dare trace my sword chi in reverse to try and find me? I'll take off half your shoulder first." In the next moment, Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, felt immense pressure on his right shoulder as a ball of demonic energy condensed in evil sword god's hand. At the same time, that voice rang out in Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal's mind. "This ball of spirit power contains the sword Dao Chi of my heaven-cleaving sword, and can cause permanent damage to anyone below itinerant immortal level. Even godly medicine won't help." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud bang, and the ball of spiritual energy mixed with the evil sword energy exploded. Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, was directly sent flying several thousand meters before he landed on the ground and stopped the violent impact. There was no blood as expected. The ball of spiritual energy only blasted a hole in the robe of the white-clothed youth. Evil sword god stared at this scene from a distance. The situation was a little unexpected. That was close. Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, broke out in a cold sweat. His white Taoist robe had already been blown to shreds. This was Anima's latest high-class product. Because it was too expensive, he only bought 2 in total and planned to change them on a daily basis. In the end, one of them was scrapped. There was a basketball-sized hole in his white Taoist robe on his shoulder, revealing the long johns that Mother Wang had given him earlier. It was obvious that Wang Ling had also enchanted these long johns. If it hadn't been for the power of the long johns, Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, was well aware that he wouldn't have been able to withstand such explosive damage at all. At that moment, the young man in white already had a theory as to why evil sword god had been looking for him. Since they could use the Taoist robe that Taoist Guang had left behind to track evil sword god using the sword chi left on it, evil sword god could naturally also use the sword chi left on it to find this place. Previously, the Taoist robe had been sealed, and evil sword god had thought that Taoist Guang was already dead, so he hadn't followed them. Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, hadn't expected that evil sword god would actually be alerted by the reverse tracking sword chi this time. In the end, he had been careless. Evil sword god had already mastered the power of sword Dao, one of the 3,000 great spells, and had become extremely sensitive to sword Dao. He could even clearly sense something as intangible as sword chi. Grenade, throwing Senior Immortal, thought about it carefully. It seemed that he had used that tattered Taoist robe to wipe his sweat at the research institute just now. It was likely that the sword chi left on it had stained his body at that time. One misstep, and a lifetime of regret. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was filled with remorse. He knew that he was already powerless to resist the current situation, and could only think of a way to find Wang Ling first. Thinking this, he immediately stepped on the brilliant victory sword in his hand, and then swiftly soared into the sky in the direction of the Wang family's villa. Evil Sword God was too powerful. When he stepped on the spirit sword just now, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that all the electronic equipment on him had already been destroyed by the other party's overflowing sword chi. Not only that, when Evil Sword God had pressed down on his shoulder just now, the moment the psionic power was released, all the street lights on the road were instantly extinguished, and everything became pitch black. All the electronic devices in the area, including the cars that were moving, stopped working in an instant. They were all destroyed by the evil sword chi. In the darkness, Evil Sword God opened his eyes, which emitted a faint purple light and gave off a very demonic feeling. A little interesting. Evil Sword God sneered. He hadn't expected his move just now to actually not cause any damage to the young man, which proved that the defensive equipment under the young man's Taoist robe wasn't of a low grade. Looking in the direction in which Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had fled, Evil Sword God's eyes focused on the spirit sword which Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was standing on. Although the sword was wrapped in layers of seals, it gave him a very familiar feeling. Back then, his Shizhuan Fan Rue, whose Taoist name was Heavenly Sword Immortal, had been famous for thousands of years on Sword Dao because of his two-handed swordsmanship. And both swords which were hailed as the two great godly swords were in the hands of Heavenly Sword Immortal Fan Rue. One was called Heaven Cleaving, which was number 1 on the list of swords in power, and the one which Evil Sword God had now seized. The other was called Brilliant Victory, which was number 1 on the list of swords in defense, and had an extremely powerful parrying ability and defensive attribute. Back then, after he had killed his Shifu and snatched Heaven Cleaving from him, he had been looking for the whereabouts of Brilliant Victory all this time. Even though Brilliant Victory's aura was wrapped in layers of seals, he had still been able to smell its fragrance when he had gotten close. There's no mistaking it. Evil Sword God stuck out his long pointed tongue and licked his lips. He had initially just wanted to teach a lesson to this junior who had dared to follow his sword chi and track his aura. He hadn't expected to accidentally learn of Brilliant Victory's whereabouts. But why was Brilliant Victory in this person's hands? Evil Sword God laughed evilly. Forget it, let's catch this person first. Chapter 439. It would take less than a quarter of an hour to fly at top speed to the Wang family's villa in a straight line. But Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't choose this direct route now. Considering Evil Sword God's ferocious nature, he didn't want to involve innocent passers-by. Thus, he steered the Brilliant Victory sword and took a detour to a sparsely populated area. But this way, it would take him 40 minutes to reach the Wang family's villa. Whether he lived or died today would all depend on these 40 minutes. At that moment, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal just hoped that no traffic police would stop him. He was already speeding while flying the sword at top speed. It was a small matter if the traffic police stopped him and deducted points or fined him or revoked his driving license. But if Evil Sword God interfered, more innocent people would suffer. From beginning to end, Evil Sword God didn't move. The evil pupil light in his eyes lit up. He named this move, looking at the horizon with one eye, and it was also one of the purple investigative demon eyes techniques. Back then, after personally killing his Shifu, his second stop had been the Tang sect, which his Shifu had been on good terms with. He had found Tang Shizhuo, the current 19th generation sect leader's disciple, and taken off his pair of purple investigative demon eyes to install them in his own eyes. With this pair of demon eyes in hand and the eye technique, looking at the horizon with one eye, his eyes could track very far away. Want to go somewhere with fewer people? Not a bad idea. Unfortunately, it's no use. Evil Sword God sneered in his heart. Standing on the spot with one hand behind his back, he waved his hand and slashed down with his sword in the air. Interesting guy, but in my eyes, you're still just a miscellaneous cultivator. A space fissure opened. After calculating Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's escape route, Evil Sword God stepped into it and disappeared. Flying through the air, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal instantly felt nervous. He thought he had already escaped far enough, but the pressure from Evil Sword God had never disappeared. He could feel a pair of eyes staring at him from behind. I have to hold on. I have to get to Brother Ling. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal gritted his teeth, turned around, and threw out several black grenades in a row as he recited a spell. Enhanced Sky Bomb Grenade. In an instant, there was the sound of explosions, and in the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with smoke and fog for thousands of miles. Boom boom boom. This enhanced version of sky-piercing thunder was deafening, and the fog it emitted was not ordinary either. There was a fog that could temporarily blind people. When Evil Sword God tore open a space fissure and walked out, he immediately found himself wrapped in fog. Sky-shattering thunder? Evil Sword God snorted coldly. He didn't make any big movements, but his purple investigative demon eyes circulated again and he roared savagely, "Junior! What can a mere blinding fog do to me? What can you do to me? Why should I? How?" In the next moment, two beams of light shot out from the purple investigative demon eye like demonic dragons. It directly pierced through the dense fog for thousands of miles. Hoo-hoo. Two sounds. The demon dragon released from the purple investigative demon eye charged through the fog and scattered the smoke for thousands of miles. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was startled by this scene. His sky-shattering thunder was an ancestral hidden weapon. Back then, his ancestor's godfather had been a descendant of the Tang sect, and had specially modified it. An ordinary sky-shattering thunder was enough to contend with a perfected person, but this enhanced version could even stall a true immortal in pursuit. At the very least, it should be able to stall for time for a while. He had already used up all 4 of the enhanced version of sky-shattering thunder he had on him. But this evil sword god was actually able to deal with it so easily and directly ignore the dense fog for thousands of miles. Combined with the troublesome power of Sword Dao, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal judged that evil sword god's overall combat strength had already surpassed that of a true immortal. He was probably already infinitely close to the level of a venerated immortal. As he fled, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was already sweating profusely. He sighed inwardly and felt a trace of despair. Was this the despair of an extremely inauspicious divination? Indeed, since ancient times, he seemed to have never heard of a case where a person who had been divined by an extremely ominous divination could successfully escape. The young man in white stopped fleeing and looked in the direction of the Wang family's small villa. He was now halfway to the Wang family's small villa. It was definitely too late for him to escape. Evil Sword God had already caught up behind him. Pointing his sword at Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, he couldn't help sneering. "Mongrel cultivator. Have you already given up?" In the air, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal turned around, his body trembling uncontrollably. The gap in realms was really too big. Anyone else wouldn't be able to bear it. The fact that he was able to stand in the air without collapsing was entirely due to the long johns he was wearing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to talk to Evil Sword God on the same plane. If it had been anyone else at the same realm, they probably wouldn't even have been able to straighten their legs under such powerful spiritual pressure. This junior has long heard of Lord Evil Sword God's might. Today, this junior humbly admits defeat. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal cupped his fists in a salute. "Little junior. There's no use stalling for time. My venerable self has never successfully escaped from anyone I want to kill." Evil Sword God pointed his sword at him, and the demonic and overbearing sword chi on the blade vibrated in the air. "Mongrel cultivator. My venerable self wants to ask you, what on earth is this armor you're wearing? If you tell me the truth, my venerable self can let you die a little more painlessly." "This person's name is Wang Ling," Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal replied. "The armor I'm wearing was made by him. The two of them aren't far away. If Senior Evil Sword God is willing to shout for him, he'll definitely hear you." At this point, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal knew that it was already impossible for him to escape, but he still clung to one last glimmer of hope. "How about you shout for him?" After staring blankly for a moment, Evil Sword God couldn't stop laughing wildly. "In the end, you're just a mongrel cultivator. You actually sold out your friend so easily. Don't worry, my venerable self will definitely shout for him." He could tell that Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wasn't lying. His purple investigative demon eyes could detect minute expressions on a person's face, and he would immediately be able to tell if someone was lying. He raised his sword and pointed it at Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. "Don't worry. Once my venerable self exterminates you, your friend will come down to accompany you very soon." As he said this, Evil Sword God raised his hand, and the heaven-cleaving sword flew out. As it swung out, the space around it cracked inch by inch. Was it over? In the last moment of his life, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's mind was exceptionally calm. Under the ferocious sword light, his vision was filled with hallucinations. It seemed like he was seeing Wang Ling. He couldn't block it at all. He couldn't even see the shadow of the heaven-cleaving sword clearly. In the next moment, his entire body was instantly pierced by the heaven-cleaving sword, and the power of sword Dao exploded in his body as he turned into a bloody mist. TCH. In the end, you're just a mongrel cultivator. You can't even withstand a single blow. Evil Sword God sneered. He stretched out his hand to grab the brilliant victory sword, then roared wildly as he directly used the 10,000-li telepathy spell to shout wildly in the air. Wang Ling. Where is mongrel cultivator Wang Ling? Mongrel cultivator Wang Ling. Come out and die. Come out and die. Come out and die. Come out and die. However, the echo came to an abrupt end. Because in the next moment, Evil Sword God saw a youngster appear in the air opposite him at some point. Without saying a word, this youngster's figure moved, and he instantly appeared in front of Evil Sword God, face to face. Evil Sword God finally broke out in a cold sweat. He realized that his purple investigative demon eyes couldn't catch him at all. Evil Sword God stared at him. You're a mongrel. Before he could finish speaking, Wang Ling had already slapped him. Evil Sword God sneered. Humph. Insignificant skill. He stretched out his arm to fend it off. However, in the next moment, there was the sound of arm bones breaking. This slap landed accurately on Evil Sword God's face. Evil Sword God screamed as he felt an incredible pain in his face. Blood flew out of his nose, his teeth flew out, and his eyes widened in terror. He directly turned into a meteor as he was smashed into the ground from 10,000 meters in the air. Chapter 440. Evil Sword God was directly smashed into the ground. In that instant, one could only think of the phrase, 3 inches into the ground. Wang Ling stared at the human-shaped dent in the ground, smoke still rising from his palm. Actually, when Wang Ling had been at home earlier, he had already sensed a trace of unease, but it was a pity that he had still been a step too late. This slap was a lesson for Evil Sword God's arrogance, and he hadn't used his full strength. Because Wang Ling felt that if he could free this devil with just one slap, it would really be too easy on him. Wang Ling floated in the air. In order to prevent others from getting involved in this fight, when he had smacked Evil Sword God, the intrinsic spirit field had already covered the area to form an independent space that was separated from the real world. Evil Sword God crawled out of the pit with a swollen face, which twitched slightly. Apart from anger, he was more shocked. He stared at Wang Ling. Itinerant immortal? No. He was definitely stronger than an itinerant immortal. But judging from his realm and aura alone, the youngster in front of him was indeed an itinerant immortal. But it really didn't make sense for a mere itinerant immortal to be able to beat him like this with one slap. Evil Sword God raised his eyes and reached out to touch his cheek. A purple spirit light lit up in his hand, and the swelling on his face almost instantly healed. Jumping out of the pit, he looked around and realized that the scene in front of him had already changed. Thanks to his purple investigative demon eyes, he was well aware that this wasn't an illusion, but a real scene. In front of him, that old stone statue, those dozen or so palm trees that were still standing despite being in their twilight years, and the school building behind them that looked like it had been renovated many times. Everything was undoubtedly real. And at that moment, the youngster who had smacked him to the ground with one slap was now looking down at him from the old stone statue. Instant release of the intrinsic spirit field. Evil Sword God's eyes darkened as he thought that this miscellaneous cultivator young man was indeed not simple. He was able to display formidable strength beyond his realm, and this intrinsic spirit field, which originally could only be used at the true immortal level, could be instantly released. All of this was a clear indication of this youngster's extraordinary strength. Heh, was I careless? Thinking this, Evil Sword God clutched his stomach and started to laugh like he had lost his mind. So many years had passed. It had been too long since he had tasted pain. Wang Ling's slap had woken him up, and also made him feel a kind of evil nature that had fused with his blood continuously churn all over his body. Mongrel cultivator, you did well. You've successfully piqued my interest. The junior that I killed earlier actually dared to use his sword chi to track me. I thought it was a kind of provocation. Evil Sword God held Brilliant Victory in his left hand and Heaven Cleaving in his right. He then raised his right arm and pointed the blade at Wang Ling. Since you're his friend, you should also be punished for his disrespect to me. Not just you. Wait until I cut you into 8 pieces. Then I'll grab your soul. I'll kill your family and friends one by one. Hearing this, Wang Ling took a deep breath. Saying this, Evil Sword God looked around contemptuously and snorted. Humph. It's just an intrinsic spirit field. What can it do to me? Evil Sword God was very confident. He was sure that he had been careless earlier, because he hadn't used any defensive means at the time, and had only used his physical body to block the attack. In the end, he had been careless and suffered a great loss. Now that he was serious, Evil Sword God felt his evil nature surge. Wang Ling's slap had stimulated his fighting spirit. Not only that, he had now gathered Heaven Cleaving and Brilliant Victory, which could be said to be a combination of offensive and defensive spirit swords on the spirit sword list, which made his battle strength even more formidable than before. Mongrel Cultivator. From the moment my venerable self seized this Brilliant Victory sword, the game was already over. In the next moment, Evil Sword God attacked again. Mongrel Cultivator, die. He flashed across the ground like a bolt of lightning. Even in Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field, his movements were still very swift and fierce. Holding 2 swords in his hands, he advanced toward the old stone statue where Wang Ling was standing as he split into many clones that were dazzling and too much for the eye to take in. Looking at this scene, Wang Ling sighed in his heart. He didn't quite understand why people nowadays like to perform acrobatics in battle the higher their realms were. Not only did this kind of flashy attack give people headaches, but in Wang Ling's view, it actually didn't have a crucial effect on the final outcome of the battle. So wasn't it better to be simpler? Watching Evil Sword God charge at him and split into more and more clones, Wang Ling's gaze was focused on the one and only main body. Then he raised his hand, ready to deliver a second slap. Ahem. Evil Sword God's main body was getting closer and closer. In the next moment, a figure appeared in front of Wang Ling. But Wang Ling ignored him. His face was indifferent and expressionless. Go to hell. Mongrel Cultivator. At that moment, Evil Sword God's main body appeared behind him. On the old stone statue, Wang Ling spun around. Boom! Like playing golf, a second slap landed precisely on Evil Sword God's face. That enormous force came crashing down with almost crushing force, and half of Evil Sword God's face directly caved in. Evil Sword God was sent flying by Wang Ling once again. A different beginning, but the same ending. History was always strikingly similar. Inside the intrinsic spirit field, Evil Sword God had already smashed through the teaching building. Wang Ling's slap directly sent Evil Sword God flying into the main building, passing through several classrooms and even the toilet in passing. When he finally flew out, he was still carrying the toilet's water tank on his head. Wang Ling gazed at him with a relaxed expression. With a wave of his hand, he casually used the gravitational spell to grab the 2 swords next to Evil Sword God. How is this possible? His face covered in blood, Evil Sword God crawled up from the sports field and spat out a mouthful of blood. He had been completely beaten senseless. At the same time, Wang Ling turned to look at another spot in the sky. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who had been turned into a bloody mist by the power of Sword Dao earlier, had already reformed, and even his long johns and white Taoist robe had been perfectly restored. With the special effect of the soul suppression ring, he had been directly resurrected on the spot without a single mistake. When Wang Ling had arrived earlier, he had already sensed that Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal hadn't really died, because he could sense that the spirit sword contract between the Brilliant Victory Sword and Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal hadn't been broken. Of the 10 soul suppression rings which he had refined using the Great Weapon Refining Spell and the 8 classes of divine weapons, the rest were average 3rd-class holy weapons, and Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's ring was the most special one. Apart from being able to hold a soul space, the most important ability of the soul suppression ring was to protect the soul and prevent it from dispersing. After 2 minutes, the soul could be used as a foundation to reform a physical body for resurrection. This was a genuine resurrection ring. The only difference was that other people's 3rd-class soul suppression rings could only resurrect them twice at most. The one in Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hand was a world-defying ring. As long as the ring wasn't destroyed. In theory it could be done. Chapter 441. Time returned to the moment when Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was pierced by the heaven-cleaving sword infused with the power of Sword Dao, and completely exploded into a bloody mist. In that instant, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal thought that it would be very painful, but the truth was that he actually didn't feel any pain at all. His body had already completely collapsed as the power of Sword Dao pierced through all his tendons and meridians. There wasn't even any flesh left as he disintegrated into a bloody mist. However, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that his soul had actually been preserved in perfect condition. In his soul state, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that he was just an incorporeal body. He floated in the air, but the scene in front of him was still vivid in his mind. After Evil Sword God had roared a few times, Wang Ling had instantly appeared and directly slapped Evil Sword God so hard that he couldn't take care of himself. Too strong. Sure enough, Brother Ling's strength was even more terrifying than he had imagined. But, what was going on? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't understand it. Logically speaking, given the power of the heaven-cleaving sword, which could almost be called a divine sword, coupled with the power of Sword Dao, even a soul could be destroyed in an instant, let alone a physical body. But the result was contrary to Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's expectations. His soul was actually unscathed. A moment later, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that the bloody mist drifting in the air was actually condensing again. His meridians were regenerating bit by bit, and his physical body was reforming bit by bit. Just like the legendary Blood Escape spell, a brand new version of himself was formed. Not only that, even his clothes were reforming. A perfect resurrection? It wasn't until that moment that Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that the soul suppression ring on the ring finger of his left hand was surging with an enormous amount of spirit power. It was the spirit power produced by the special power of this magic ring that had protected his soul from being destroyed by the heaven-cleaving sword and allowed his physical body to continuously reform. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help sighing. If this extremely inauspicious calamity was his destiny, then this soul suppression ring had already successfully helped him get through it. A person didn't encounter an extremely inauspicious calamity many times in their lives, and the chances of turning it around were almost negligible. It was precisely because of this that Cheat Master Reed felt that he was completely hopeless after divining Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's calamity. It looked like he owed Brother Ling another huge favor. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help sighing in his heart as his body was completely reconstructed and resurrected. If it wasn't for this ring, it would have been difficult for him to survive this calamity. By the time he was resurrected, Evil Sword God had already been slapped a second time. He was sent flying by Wang Ling's slap and landed on the sports field. When he flew out of the school building, his head actually hit the water tank in the school toilet. Evil Sword God crawled up from the ground, his whole body trembling and even his knees shaking uncontrollably. He was frightened, but also angry. When had he, the 10-meter Sword God, ever suffered such humiliation? After 2 consecutive palm strikes, not only did he not have the strength to fight back, even his 2 spirit swords had been snatched away by the other party. This was an absolute humiliation, and Evil Sword God felt embarrassed for the first time. His body trembled, and he gritted his teeth as he stubbornly stood up from the ground. His entire body was trembling, and blood flowed out from his 7 apertures. Dark red blood flowed out from the gaps between his teeth. Even his front teeth had disappeared. This young man was definitely not just a bodiless immortal. Evil Sword God was certain. To be able to injure him to this extent with just these 2 slaps, this person definitely wasn't an ordinary person. But he still refused to admit defeat. Since his debut, he, Evil Sword God, had caused fear in all walks of life, and no one he wanted to kill could escape his wrath. When had he ever been humiliated like this? However, when he saw Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who had already turned into a bloody mist in the air, reform his body and come back to life, a rare look of horror appeared on his face. This is impossible. How is this possible? Evil Sword God gnashed his teeth. Given the strength of that young man in white, there was absolutely no way he would have the strength to hide any means of resurrection. His heaven-cleaving sword contained the formidable power of Sword Dao, which was the heavenly Dao of the 3,000 great spells. When the power of heavenly Dao poured into one's body, it was almost no different from divine punishment. The moment it entered one's body, even one's soul would disintegrate completely, let alone one's body. This was a method that would leave one without a burial ground. Evil Sword God didn't know how many people he had killed with this method. As far as he knew, no one had survived. So, who the hell knew what he had experienced today? Evil Sword God looked at grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, who had been completely resurrected, and even his clothes had been completely restored, as if time had been reversed. At that moment, Evil Sword God's heart was filled with confidence. No matter what, my venerable self has to respond with my strongest means in this battle, and I can't hold anything back. Back then, Shifu Sword Immortal Fan Rui chose senior brother Yi Zhenchuan as his successor, and that was the beginning of all my resentment. All these years, my venerable self has painstakingly practiced sword skills and cultivated sword Dao. I don't think senior brother is my match anymore, but... Evil Sword God realized that at that moment, he was facing an even greater challenge than confronting his senior brother, General Yi Zhenchuan. Back then, everything he had done had been purely to prove his strength. He had killed his Shifu and painstakingly practiced sword skills for the sake of one day being able to exterminate his senior brother, General Yi Zhenchuan, with one sword strike. Today, however, he had clearly encountered an even greater opponent. Evil Sword God took a deep breath and calmed his mind down as quickly as possible. No matter what, he had to get serious. Evil Sword God got up. True immortal spirit power surged all over his body, and his wounds healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a lot of situations, especially in battle, when one side was at a disadvantage, many people would choose to take pills in order to fight a battle of attrition. But Evil Sword God was different. His pride wouldn't allow him to do so. When it came to Sword Dao, he thought that he was almost invincible, and that no one could beat him in Sword Dao. Sword Spirit Contract. He made a hand seal and forcibly activated the power of the contract. In an instant, the heaven-cleaving sword in Wang Ling's hand turned into particles of light and reappeared in Evil Sword God's hand. Although Wang Ling had seized both spirit swords, he hadn't erased the power of the contract on them, so Evil Sword God had an opportunity to take advantage of it. But it didn't matter anymore. Wang Ling could see that this Evil Sword God was confident in his Sword Dao. Since that was the case, he should use the same Sword Dao to fight back and completely destroy this kind of person's confidence. Brother Ling. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. What should we do now? Wang Ling stretched out his hand, and a space crack directly appeared in the air. Then, a peachwood spirit sword was directly pulled out of the crack. Without saying a word, Wang Ling directly threw Jinka into grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hands. The moment he caught Jinka, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hands trembled. Go cut him down. Wang Ling looked straight at Evil Sword God as he spoke telepathically to grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. There was no superfluous talk. Chapter 442. At this time, if someone asked grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, "What on earth does it feel like to hold a big boss sword?" Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal would definitely be speechless. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal would definitely be speechless. In fact, he had once thought of asking Wang Ling to borrow Jinka for a mission, but after the battle at Immortal Mansion, he had completely given up on the idea. That battle had ended in a one-sided crushing victory for Jinka. So this was a true, big boss sword. At that moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's heart trembled as he held Jinka. Brother Ling. Is this really okay? Wang Ling retreated behind him and patted him lightly on the shoulder without saying anything. Then, Wang Ling directly returned to the ground and left the battle in the sky to grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and Evil Sword God. Why didn't he make a move? The reason was very simple. Because grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's encounter with Evil Sword God was a calamity that was destined to befall him, and he could only get through this calamity himself. Brother Ling, I think we should settle this battle in a more peaceful way? Like sitting down, having a cup of tea, and having a chat? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal held Jinka with a slightly helpless expression on his face. He felt that things had changed drastically in the last few days. To be honest, from the moment he held Jinka, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal already knew how this battle would end. At that moment, thanks to true immortal spirit power, Evil Sword God's injuries had mostly healed, but the blood on the corners of his mouth hadn't dried up. It could only be said that this was a genuine true immortal. Even in someone else's intrinsic spirit field, there was still spirit power as vast as the sea in his body. A wooden sword? No. There had to be a trap. Looking at the sword in grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hand, the corners of Evil Sword God's mouth instantly twitched. Where did your friend get his sword? After those 2 slaps, Evil Sword God thought he already had an idea of the youngster's strength. He had seen the youngster pull this wooden sword out of the space fissure earlier, so he didn't need to think to know that this definitely wasn't an ordinary sword. As one of Wang Ling's best friends, grenade-throwing senior immortal also knew about Jinka's background. The young man in white thought for a moment, then replied, This is a children's peachwood sword for teaching, flower and bird market, 998. Mongrel cultivator. Are you looking down on me? Evil sword god hovered in the air with heaven cleaving in his hand. Evil purple sword chi swirling around the blade. He pointed his sword forward. Do you know? Why was I given the title of 10-meter sword god? Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Wang Ling sat down cross-legged on the ground with his arms crossed and an indifferent expression on his face. He was aware of every movement in the intrinsic spirit field, and didn't need to look up to know what was going on. He had a rough idea of what evil sword god was trying to say. Although he had already mastered the great sword Dao spell and learned to use the power of sword Dao, everyone had a different understanding of sword Dao. 10-meter sword god? Could it be that evil sword god had mastered a sword Dao supreme skill that could kill within 10 meters? Wang Ling cupped his chin in his hand as he pondered this, when evil sword god laughed wildly. True immortals can create intrinsic spirit fields, but my intrinsic spirit field is different from other true immortals. As long as it's within a range of 10 meters, it's an intrinsic spirit field that my venerable self has created with the power of sword Dao. In other words, as long as my venerable self unleashes the power of sword Dao to the fullest, I will be invincible in close combat within 10 meters. Wang Ling, grenade-throwing senior immortal. This explanation caused everyone to fall into silence. The corners of Wang Ling's and grenade-throwing senior immortal's lips twitched as they felt powerless to ridicule him. So, this was how he got his title of 10-meter sword god? What kind of goddamn power of sword Dao was this? Even if he was invincible in close combat beyond 10 meters, didn't that mean he could win as long as he watched from a distance? Grenade-throwing senior immortal couldn't help wiping at his sweat. As expected, this evil sword god wasn't a normal person. On the other side, evil sword god was very confident that he was invincible in close combat within 10 meters. He pointed the tip of his sword at grenade-throwing senior immortal. Don't think about relying on long-range attacks to escape. My venerable self has perfected the teleportation technique for many years. Once I activate the power of sword Dao, no one will be able to escape from my grasp. Evil sword god said in a low voice. Today, whether it's you or this friend of yours, I'll kill them all. Or this friend of yours, I'm going to obliterate them both. Then I'll extract your souls. I'll torture you in the cruelest way possible. He guessed that the young man in white whom he had killed previously might have had some kind of resurrection magic treasure that could be used to pay for his life. It wasn't that such magic treasures didn't exist in the cultivation world, but they were almost priceless. The young man had already used it once, so evil sword god was now very confident that as long as the young man in white died again like before, there was absolutely no possibility of him coming back to life. How could there be a magic treasure in this world that could resurrect infinitely? Furthermore, this person wasn't a demi-human. Infinite resurrection or whatever. It shouldn't exist. Mongrel cultivator, die. Evil sword god attacked, and the purple sword chi lingering around the heaven-cleaving sword formed a pillar of chi that pierced through his body. A skeleton-shaped phantom coalesced behind him. It was dozens of feet tall and covered in armor from head to toe. This was the heaven-cleaving sword spirit, heaven-cleaving. This armor was formed from the power of sword Dao, and Wang Ling could see through it at a glance. The sword spirit had already appeared, and this skeleton's armor was formed from the combination of the power of sword Dao and true immortal spirit power. Evil sword god had already unleashed his power of sword Dao to the fullest, and he was in a completely unrestrained state. But the expression on his face didn't change in the slightest. From the moment he had summoned Jinka and tossed it to grenade-throwing senior immortal, the game was already over. Die! Evil sword god grit his teeth as the power of sword Dao surged all over his body. The air cracked open, and the space couldn't withstand the immense pressure of evil sword god's 100% power of sword Dao at all. Holy shit! What should he do? Grenade-throwing senior immortal had never seen this kind of stance before. Given his current realm, it was impossible for him to fight a true immortal at his full strength. This is my most powerful power, die! Evil sword god shouted. He held the heaven-cleaving sword in his hand, and the heaven-cleaving sword spirit behind him stretched out its hand toward the sky at the same time. A huge sword light lingered around the skeleton sword spirit skeleton, and the evil purple sword light turned into a light cannon that shot toward grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Destructive Death Ray. In an instant, fierce winds surged in all directions and space cracked. Everything in the path of the light cannon broke apart in an unstoppable manner. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal knew that he had the protection of the soul suppression ring and might not die. But if he was hit by this level of light cannon, he felt that there wouldn't even be a bloody mist left of him. There might not even be dregs left of him after this blast. But in the next moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that his body actually moved on its own. Lord Jinka? Chapter 443. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal hadn't expected this big shot's momentum to be so ferocious. Knowing that Evil Sword God was practically invincible within 10 meters, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal still pierced through the sky. In contrast to the surging evil purple sword Chi, Jinka led grenade-throwing Senior Immortal in taking advantage of the situation. There weren't any exaggerated light effects, and they were just covered in a faint brown spirit light that protected them like a Taoist robe. This sword stabbed out at the destructive death ray, which Evil Sword God had released, and drew a beautiful arc in the sky. Without any fancy sword skills, one man and one sword stabbed out elegantly. When the Peachwood Sword's brown sword Chi touched the destructive death ray which had been released in the distance, an astonishing scene happened. That clearly weak brown sword Chi was like a miracle descending to the world as it followed the center of the destructive ray which was as thick as a horned dragon and forcibly split it apart. Heavenly! Heavenly flying immortal? Evil Sword God turned pale with astonishment. The young man in white's posture reminded him of a legendary sword technique. Turning complexity into simplicity and using small to catch big was a move specially used to counter large-scale attacks, and could render powerful offensive sword techniques like Destruction Ray ineffective. However, this was a godly sword technique which had long been lost. Whether it was his Shifu sword Immortal Fan Rue or the magnificent Immortals Depository of Buddhist texts, which was the largest depository in the cultivation circle today, the dossiers on this sword technique had long disappeared. There wasn't even a picture on the title page, let alone a record. But how could this miscellaneous cultivator in white use it? Evil Sword God pondered this, and could only think of one possibility. Unless the Peachwood sword in this miscellaneous cultivator's hand was leading him into battle. If that was the case, a lot of things made sense. Evil Sword God exhaled, and the heaven-cleaving sword spirit behind him let out a long shrill cry. True immortal spirit power rippled out in all directions, and the dozen or so palm trees in the school square in the intrinsic spirit field snapped. All the windows in the teaching building were shattered, and the entire building was destroyed by the storm of sound as easily as breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Why was it that every time an almighty entered a battlefield, they liked to make their presence felt on the buildings? Holding Jinka, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sighed in his heart. Fortunately, this was only an intrinsic spirit field which had been modeled after Brother Ling's school. If this had really been No. 60 high school, that true immortal roar just now would have killed all the teachers and students in the school. Your friend's spirit sword is a little interesting. Evil Sword God licked his lips, and his long sharp tongue changed color under the purple light of the evil death sword. Hee, I'll let you experience my venerable self's 10-meter sword Tao. Evil Sword God said in a deep voice. After that, the heaven-cleaving sword spirit power behind him said, Chi, and Sword Demon is Yang said. Immediately after, a powerful sword principal gravitational force was generated. Like a planet, the runes leaped and converged into a circle of 10 meters. T mortal T in Brother Ling God Ling sword, and suddenly, grenade-throwing mortal felt Chi. In the blink of an eye, he was pulled into the 10-meter circle of swordsmanship. Spirit God. Instantly. Halo of weakness? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal squeezed his hands and felt a little weak, but the brown spirit light that split off from Jinka's body very quickly diluted it and made him feel a little better. But he didn't make a sound. Instead, he clutched his chest with a shocked expression. What's this? Evil Sword God smiled. This is the holy void light that my venerable self's 10-meter sword defense brings. How is it? Do you feel weak all over? Can't use your strength? And you feel like you're sweating profusely? It's not just you. Even if my Shifu Fan Rue and senior brother Yi Jianchuan enter the circle, the same thing will happen. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Wang Ling. Jinka. Evil Sword God. How is it? Are you afraid? If you can't dispel my halo of weakness, you won't be able to move an inch inside my 10-meter sword defense. Of course. My venerable self is invincible to begin with. But as soon as he said this, Jinka lured Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal to attack again. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal brandished his peachwood sword and drew a 6-pointed star in the air. Then, he recited a spell as he held the sword in his left hand and formed a seal with his right. In that instant, a deep blue spirit light was emitted from the 6-pointed star seal inside the 10-meter sword defense. The air was dotted with stars, as if they were in a sea of stars. Under the illumination of that starlight, all the weakening effects faded away. This looked like just a minor spell, but Evil Sword God was astonished. 9-star skies? Another legendary sword skill. Evil Sword God narrowed his eyes, greatly shaken in his heart. This was a legendary sword skill used to purify debuffs, and it had also been lost. He had actually used 2 legendary sword skills in a row? Evil Sword God suddenly felt a little tired. Is this the 9-star skies? Evil Sword God asked. That's right, this is the 9-star skies, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal replied. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal replied. After hearing Wang Ling's telepathic message, he now had a basic understanding of this sword technique. Furthermore, this sword art is also the highest level of the 9th level of the 9-star skies, Chendong art. Hearing this, Evil Sword God's expression instantly darkened. This was actually the highest level of the 9th level of the 9-star skies. No wonder it had been able to dispel his holy void light so easily. At that moment, Evil Sword God suddenly felt like he was doubting life. This is the end. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal gripped his peachwood sword. At that moment, a voice that didn't belong to him at all came out of his mouth. It was Jinka's voice. His pupils shone with brown spirit light as he pointed at Evil Sword God. Commoner, have you ever seen a sword skill that descends from the heavens? Wang Ling looked up at this scene. As Evil Sword God had said, everyone had a different understanding of the Great Sword Dao spell, and each person grasped a unique characteristic. If Evil Sword God's Sword Dao characteristic could be said to be invincible within 10 meters, then Wang Ling's Sword Dao characteristic could be said to be omniscient. All the Sword Dao in the world was a part of it, and there wasn't a sword technique that Wang Ling didn't know. It was just that he was too lazy to use it. It was just that he was too lazy to use them on a daily basis, because he could deal with all the enemies he had faced with just his fists and feet. There were many times when Wang Ling didn't think it was worth brandishing a sword or a spear. Wang Ling's Great Sword Dao characteristic was that he was proficient in everything. As Evil Sword God's personal spirit sword, Wang Ling had already passed on all the sword skills he had mastered to Jinka through the spirit sword contract. Chapter 444. When Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's pupils shone with brown spirit light, his aura instantly changed. Evil Sword God stood within the 10-meter sword circle, which was supposed to be an invincible domain. He had deliberately fused the intrinsic spirit field with his sword Dao. Although this greatly reduced the range of the intrinsic spirit field, the advantage was that he didn't have to fear fighting in someone else's intrinsic spirit field. So when Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field was activated, Evil Sword God had no fear at all. The greatest value of the intrinsic spirit field was that it could use the home field to suppress the enemy's ability to absorb spirit power and at the same time suppress spirit power. Evil Sword God thought that he was a genius at combining his intrinsic spirit field with his own sword Dao. At the very least, within this 10-meter sword circle, he was invincible even if he was in someone else's domain. But now, facing this young man in white, he actually felt a terrifying sense of oppression. This aura made him feel stifled. Who on earth are you? Evil Sword God asked, but in fact he already had a guess in his heart. He suspected that the sword spirit of the Peachwood sword had probably attached itself to this young man in white. But what kind of operation was this? The legendary unity of man and sword? Evil Sword God felt that the situation was already a little beyond his understanding. When it came to Sword Dao, he felt that there was no one in the world who had a more thorough understanding of it than he did. He wasn't a venerated immortal, but he had comprehended the Great Sword Dao spell and mastered the 10-meter Sword Dao. He had also been a genius at fusing this 10-meter Sword Dao with the intrinsic spirit field to form an invincible domain. However, this extremely powerful sword Tao of man and sword, as one should only be able to display such a fusion method when the compatibility between the spirit sword and its master had reached the highest state. Even for his current self, his rapport with the heaven-cleaving sword was still quite lacking. Because the heaven-cleaving sword hadn't originally belonged to him, and he had seized it midway. Evil Sword God squinted and stared suspiciously at the youngster on the ground. This peachwood sword clearly belonged to this youngster. How could even his friend become one with the sword? He stared at Wang Ling with a dark expression. Then, very quickly, the corners of his mouth twitched. Because he noticed that the young man wasn't paying attention to the battle in the sky at all. He was sitting cross-legged while holding a book and writing something. Evil Sword God used his purple investigative demon eyes to activate the Horizon Eye technique, and then saw the name of the book. 1 talisman and 1 seal script. Even the fine print could be seen clearly. The Ministry of Education's designated practice textbook for senior high school talisman class, meticulously compiled by hundreds of experts, leading in sales for 60 consecutive years. Evil Sword God's face twitched. Right at this moment, he saw the white-robed young man who had been possessed by the peachwood sword spirit shake his hand. The peachwood sword in his hand had already turned into light particles and completely dissipated. This was the true unity of man and sword. When man and sword became one, the body of the sword would also disappear and become one with the man. With his body as the hilt and his hand as the edge. His entire body was filled with sword chi. This 10-meter sword circle should have been an invincible domain exclusive to him, but Evil Sword God was aghast to find that the situation had actually reversed. After man and sword became one, the brown sword chi that the young man in white gave off was truly terrifying, as if he was the king of gods. Wherever that sword chi passed, the purple sword chi of the heaven-cleaving sword retreated. There was no way to think about this situation normally, because it didn't make sense at all. This was his 10-meter sword circle, which he had set up with the power of Sword Tao, and he had tried it time and time again. However, in today's duel, Evil Sword God had a feeling that the power of Sword Tao, which he had been able to use with ease in the past, didn't seem to be listening to him anymore. And the most frightening thing was that he felt an immense pressure. He had already been floating inside his 10-meter sword circle for a very long time, and there was no movement at all. It wasn't that he was pretending to be aloof. It was that he couldn't move at all. Commoner! Jinka's voice rang out from grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's body. His hands were behind his back, and his whole body was covered in brown sword light. Even inside this 10-meter sword circle, his aura was overwhelming. Evil Sword God was horrified. This voice actually made him feel fear from the depths of his soul. The cold sweat on his back instantly soaked through his Taoist robe and stuck to his body. He couldn't even speak, and could only use the sword spirit contract to order the heaven-cleaving sword skeleton sword spirit to communicate. The skeleton's voice was very deep, like an emissary from hell. Who are you? Ling don't like trouble. Must quickly resolve. Jinka, who was inside grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's body, completely ignored the other party's question. In the next moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal took a step forward, and in a split second, the space inside the 10-meter sword circle actually cracked inch by inch. All the evil sword chi seemed to have been purified and disappeared. It wasn't just the heaven-cleaving sword skeleton sword spirit. Evil Sword God was also stupefied. His 10-meter sword Tao had been disintegrated by this one step. No, rather than disintegrate, Evil Sword God felt that it was more appropriate to say that it had been nullified. What on earth was this peachwood sword spirit? Evil Sword God frowned deeply. The power of Sword Tao that he was most proud of had actually been completely ineffective in front of the other party. The most frightening thing was that until now, he still hadn't figured out the origin of this sword spirit. Humans were a species that feared the unknown to begin with. Even true immortals couldn't escape this. Evil Sword God thought that he had already reached the pinnacle of Sword Tao in this world, but Jinka's appearance now had completely disrupted his state of mind. For the first time, there was fear in his eyes, and his mind was restless, and it was hard for him to calm down. The last time he had been this disturbed was when he had personally killed his Shifu, Sword Immortal Fan Rue. Why? In the last few hundred years, he had relied on his own strength to prove that he was a top expert in Sword Tao. But why had someone who could be said to have broken the rules suddenly appeared? This youngster on the ground who was doing practice questions, and this unknown sword spirit who had recognized him as its master? Who the hell were these two guys? Evil Sword God felt that this was even more amazing than that bunch of Nanhan guys fooling around on the ice rink, blindly judging other countries' contestants for breaking the rules, and forcing themselves to win the championship. Nowadays, could it be that there really were referees who didn't return to their seats? The 10-meter sword defense had been nullified, and the skeleton sword spirit's figure returned to its normal size. It's all over. In the next moment, Evil Sword God watched in alarm as the figure of the young man in white instantly disappeared in front of him. Where was he? Evil Sword God's face was nervous, because his purple investigative demon eyes hadn't caught sight of Jinka's figure. In the next moment, there was a loud bang, and a figure descended from the sky with astonishing pressure. This was that sword technique descending from the sky. Chapter 445. The sky was very high. Jinka, who had possessed grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's body, was 10,000 meters up in the air, and his whole body was surrounded by a brown sword light. A huge pressure descended from the sky, instantly imprisoning his body, preventing him from casting any spells. Evil Sword God was horrified. He hadn't expected this sword technique which had fallen from the sky to actually have the effect of sealing a spirit. The instant he dove down from the sky, the pressure grew stronger and stronger. When Evil Sword God fell from 10,000 meters to 5,000 meters, this pressure not only made it impossible for him to cast spells, it also made it impossible for him to block it. His entire body was directly hammered into the ground, and he lay on the ground like a toad. His head, limbs and torso, every part of his body was firmly suppressed. Evil Sword God already couldn't remember the last time he had kissed the ground at such a close distance. With him at the center, the ground started to crack. Evil Sword God couldn't breathe as his whole body sank deep into the ground, as if he had fallen into a swamp, layer by layer. He was actually going to lose? Evil Sword God's whole body froze. If it wasn't for the protection of the heaven-cleaving sword spirit, he might have ended up in an even more tragic state. What kind of pressure was this? Even a true immortal would find it hard to bear such enormous pressure. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit was also pressed into the ground like a toad, and the man and the servant maintained the same posture, which looked very comical. Unable to speak, Evil Sword God could only send a telepathic message, so nervous that even his stupid tone disappeared. Heaven-cleaving. What on earth is this sword spirit? The skeleton sword spirit? I don't know either. Evil Sword God. As they conversed, the sky split. A skeleton sword spirit's armor, which had been formed from sword Tao power, began to crack inch by inch in the face of this unstoppable sharpness. 4,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 2,000 meters. The pressure was getting greater and greater. When they were 1,000 meters from the ground, Evil Sword God and his sword spirit had already sunk several dozen meters into the ground. Master and servant couldn't move at all. Evil Sword God grit his teeth, separated a purple investigative demon eye, and used the sword spirit contract to share their vision. The purple investigative demon eye took in the entire scene in the sky at that moment. Evil Sword God thought that it was probably a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life. In the sky, the sword technique that the unknown sword spirit had unleashed after attaching itself to the white-robed young man's body had turned into a gigantic dark golden sword of light. It descended from the sky like a god king, bringing with it a destructive pressure. Wherever the giant sword of light passed, the space of the intrinsic spirit field began to collapse. However, Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field self-recovery ability was too strong. The destructive power of this giant sword of light was immense, but the intrinsic spirit field self-recovery ability was just on par with this destructive power. As a result, the destructive power of this giant sword of light could be completely contained in his intrinsic spirit field, and wouldn't affect the real world. Otherwise, with the power of this sword, all of Songhai City was going to be destroyed. Absolute suppression. Absolute spirit sealing. There was no way to resist. With the sight-sharing ability of the purple investigative demon eye, the skeleton sword spirit was finally able to see the origin of this sword. Sweat trickled down the expressionless face of the skeleton as he spoke telepathically to Evil Sword God. World-annihilating sword. Evil Sword God looked like he had eaten godly dung. Annihilating. World-annihilating sword. The skeleton sword spirit was in despair. Swordmaster, we're done for. Don't play with Echo at this time. Evil Sword God. He's stuttering. The skeleton sword spirit. It was very obvious that neither master nor servant had expected to actually provoke such an existence, world-annihilating sword. This wasn't a characteristic, but the supreme secret of the great sword Tao spell. However, in today's world, apart from the primogenitor of Tao creation of the 3,000 great spells, the skeleton sword spirit could only think of one person who could wield the power of sword Tao and the great sword Tao spell to this level. Could it be? At that moment, the skeleton sword spirit, heaven cleaving, was genuinely sweating. My king! He didn't even dare shout out his name, because it was a taboo for all sword spirits. The might of the world-annihilating sword was unstoppable. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit sensed the air getting closer and closer to annihilation. There were probably less than 10 seconds left, and both he and evil sword god would be reduced to ashes here and now. The might of the world-annihilating sword. This was the supreme secret that was enough to contend with world-defying magic weapons and divine weapons. All 3,000 great spells had their own profound meanings, but very few people could use them. In that instant, the heaven-cleaving sword spirit's thoughts flew as he thought of a lot. That was my king. The embodiment of the great sword Tao spell, the master of sword spirits. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit had never expected that he would actually recognize a youngster as his master. He recalled the domineering scene when the youngster had sent evil sword god flying with 2 slaps. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit felt that he had miscalculated. He should have stopped this battle earlier. But right now he had no other choice. As a sword spirit, his job was to protect his master. No matter how evil his master was or what karma he had committed, he had to abide by the spirit of the contract. The moment the world-annihilating sword was about to fall, the skeleton body of the heaven-cleaving sword spirit activated the Protect Master Spirit Blade agreement with the sword spirit contract. The heaven-cleaving sword spirit was well aware that evil sword god would definitely die under this sword, but if he sacrificed his life to protect his master, there might still be a chance of survival. Now, they didn't have much time left. In this moment of crisis, the heaven-cleaving sword spirit didn't hesitate at all. This was a life in exchange for a life. As a sword spirit, heaven-cleaving abided by the contract and didn't think that he had done anything wrong. Because of the spirit sword contract, the moment heaven-cleaving made his decision, evil sword god already knew what on earth he wanted to do. Heaven-cleaving. Although he had seized this sword from his Shifu, it had been with him for 100 years, and he had long since developed feelings for it. The second before his world-annihilating sword fell, the deep eye shadow on evil sword god's body, as well as the evil pattern that stretched from the back of his neck to his entire back, faded away. The master and servant closed their eyes and accepted the punishment of the world-annihilating sword. However, the pain they had expected didn't happen. The giant sword of light fell without any sound or even an explosion. Wang Ling closed one talisman, one seal, and stood up from the ground. He brushed the dust off his body, and a gust of wind brushed past his black and white short sleeves to reveal his smooth collarbone. The world-annihilating sword had a variety of effects. One was world-annihilating punishment, which was a great killing move that could truly destroy everything. The other was world-annihilating purification, which was a power that could strip away the power of sword Tao. For the sword spirit who had loyally protected his master, Wang Ling ultimately chose to let him off the hook. As for evil sword god, stripping him of the power of sword Tao that he was so proud of was already the best punishment. And Jinka obeyed Wang Ling's will. After grenade-throwing senior immortal recovered, he was now at the edge of the deep pit in the heart of the intrinsic spirit field. Looking inside, he saw the heaven-cleaving sword spirit and evil sword god, master and servant, lying in the pit like a human pyramid. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. You, Wang Ling. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at Wang Ling behind him. Brother Ling, what do we do now? Wang Ling. What else could he do? Chapter 446. It wasn't that grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't felt anything when Jinka had possessed him. In that moment, he had almost had the misconception that he was sharing a body with a big shot. It was a very wonderful feeling that was hard to describe in detail. In any case, he just felt that he had become stronger. Through this incident, grenade-throwing senior immortal's definition of strength had been elevated to a new level. It turned out that in this world, even if you didn't become bald, you could still become strong. As long as they had the big boss in their hands, there was nothing to fear. In the end, when Jinka attached himself to grenade-throwing senior immortal and took out the world-annihilating sword, grenade-throwing senior immortal was taken aback by its effect. This was the highest level of profundity in swordsmanship, and it was comparable to a strike from the heavens. Who in the world would be able to withstand it? Although grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't relied on his own strength to display this kind of heaven-defying profound meaning of sword Tao, even if he had to pay the price with his life, He felt that it would be perfect to be able to use his own body to display this kind of heaven-defying profound meaning of Sword Dao. Because in theory, using the profound meaning of Sword Dao like the world-annihilating sword was not part of his life achievements. Thus, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was still reminiscing about the battle just now. For many people, it was rare for them to have such an opportunity to be possessed by a big boss in battle. However, once they did, they would definitely benefit immensely. When it came to Sword Dao, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was originally just a minor cultivator. His main and specialty were actually hidden weapons and body techniques. But this time, Jinka had attached itself to Wang Ling's body and gone on a rampage at the level of a big shot. Even though it had already left his body, that memory was still there. If he were to go back and study this memory, it would be of great help to improve his Sword Dao. Moreover, it was highly likely that in a short period of time, his proficiency in various techniques in the way of the sword would even surpass his main cultivation of hidden weapons and body arts. In a situation of equal strength, hidden weapons were indeed a very good method. They could be used to attack or defend, and could even have a surprising effect in a battle. However, in a situation like today where the difference in cultivation level was overwhelming, these few sky-quaking thunders were simply not enough. This was the limitation of using hidden weapons. Standing on the edge of the deep pit, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal rubbed his chin in deep thought. A post-battle summary was necessary. In this era of peace, where would there be so many fights for them to fight? After that, the scene in front of them dissipated, and the master and servant who were originally in the deep pit maintained the posture of a human pyramid and reappeared on the ground of the real world. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal knew that Wang Ling had already cancelled the intrinsic spirit field. He looked around and found that the location was quite remote. It was the side of a mountain road in the suburbs. They actually fought in a place like this. Fortunately, there were very few people here, and everywhere Evil Sword God had passed, all the electronic equipment had been destroyed by his evil sword Qi. Wang Ling had already sent Audiobook a text message. At that moment, Audiobook was on his way here at top speed, while Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was waiting on the side of the mountain road on the outskirts to deal with the aftermath. After a dozen or so seconds, the skeleton sword spirit of the Heaven Splitter disappeared. After the battle just now, the sword spirit's spiritual energy had been completely used up. It was no longer able to maintain its virtual form. As for Evil Sword God, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wasn't the least bit worried. The world-annihilating sword had already robbed him of all his power of Sword Dao. Furthermore, for a very, very long time to come, the world-annihilating sword spirit sealing effect would continue on Evil Sword God. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal turned around and cupped his fists in thanks to Wang Ling. Brother Ling, it's all thanks to you this time. But before he could finish speaking, Wang Ling's figure turned into a breeze and dissipated. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. At that moment, a figure approached from a short distance away. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal gazed in that direction with delight. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Brother Loopy Toad, why are you here? Loopy Toad replied, my master is revising, so he asked me to come take a look. This place is too remote, and I followed your scent for a while before I found this place. Revising? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was blank. Then the one before. Loopy Toad. Of course it's my master's clone. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help wiping at his sweat. This was too brutal. Although Evil Sword God had been defeated by that final world-annihilating sword. But those two slaps from Wang Ling had been genuine. It was just a clone. He had been able to beat Evil Sword God to the point where he couldn't take care of himself with just a slap. And he had even activated the intrinsic spirit field in passing. As expected, the most abnormal person next to him was Brother Ling. Too scary. Loopy Toad looked at Evil Sword God's corpse lying on the ground, and it also felt a little horrified. On the way here, it had seen the scene through the soul pet contract, which shared vision. Then, it had seen a great sword of light stuck in Evil Sword God's head. World-annihilating sword. Loopy Toad felt that a Sword Dao fanatic like Evil Sword God should be able to die in peace after being stabbed by this kind of skill. Loopy Toad sighed and looked around. Tisk, it's a little dark around here. Furthermore, this place was a little remote, and it was a little worried that Audiobook wouldn't be able to find this place smoothly. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal looked at Loopy Toad. It's okay, it's okay. Although all the electronic products nearby were destroyed when Evil Sword God's demonic nature flared up, Brother Loopy Toad, you're here now. But now that you're here, Brother Loopy Toad, It's just the right time for light. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Did Brother Loopy Toad not notice? Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Has Brother Loopy Toad not noticed? Loopy Toad. Discover what? Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Your dog fur is fluorescent. Loopy Toad. At the same time, roughly half an hour after the incident, Audiobook had already arrived at grenade-throwing senior immortal's location. The street lights near the mountain road had been destroyed. As far as the eye could see, it was a vast expanse of darkness. Actually, as early as 2 hours ago, Songhai City's police center had already received numerous reports from the public. He claimed that there was a power outage in the area where he lived, and that all electronic products were malfunctioning. At that time, Audiobook already had a bad feeling. After that, another call came in to report that someone was throwing smoke grenades in the sky above Songhai City, covering a distance of 5,000 li in dense fog. Although this fog had been thrown out on the outskirts of the city, it was still quite troublesome to deal with. Because they didn't know the specific composition of the fog, the traffic police patrolling in the sky didn't dare approach it at all. At present, this foggy area had been sealed off, and no one was allowed to approach. Moreover, they were doing the urgent dispersal work. That night, Audiobook's WeChat moments was very lively. Warden Liang of Songhai First Prison, as well as the chiefs and deputy chiefs of the cultivation police stations in various districts, were all complaining one after another. While Audiobook consoled them in his WeChat moments, he also made speculations. He speculated that the series of reactions tonight might be related to the same thing. After experiencing several major incidents, it was as if Audiobook could sense it in advance each time something big was about to happen, and he felt muddle-headed all day long, as if he was uneasy. Starting from this morning, he had felt this way again. And it was very strong. So that night, Audiobook sat in his office at the General Administration of 100 schools in Songhai City, and quietly watched the activity in his WeChat moments, not getting off work for a long time. And sure enough, not long after the series of reports. Chapter 447. This was due to a massive power outage and the failure of all kinds of electronic equipment in the area. As Audiobook sped up to the scene, he browsed through the comments online. They were full of wailing voices. In any case, Songhai City government would definitely have to pay a large sum of money in compensation. No matter what, they couldn't let the people suffer for nothing. But at the same time, Audiobook was also very curious about what on earth had happened to cause such a big impact. Deputy Director Zhong Lang and Audiobook were sitting in a car, and the driver in the driver's seat approached the destination bit by bit according to the location Wang Ling had sent him earlier. Brother Zhua, what on earth happened this time? Something big. We'll know when we get to the scene. Audiobook's answer was ambiguous. But based on all the signs, Audiobook felt that it was most likely a fight between immortals. Furthermore, the person who had been defeated by his Shifu this time was probably pretty powerful. Zhong Lang pursed his lips. But logically speaking, this matter doesn't involve the school or the students. Aren't we crossing the line by intervening like this? What if we get reported by other departments? Don't panic. Audiobook shook his head and said, first of all, this matter will definitely affect the students. Zhong Lang. Audiobook. It's almost time for the midterm exams. Now that there's such a massive power outage, the children will definitely need to study for the exams. Actually, I've already received a lot of complaints in the office just now. As guardians of the motherland's young seedlings, we have to verify what on earth is going on for the children. Zhong Lang was stunned. How could this be related? The point was that he had taken a look at the school forum in Tieba just now, and the group of children inside were cheering. A lot of homework now had to be done on the computer, so what did a massive power outage mean? For many students, their first reaction wasn't to regret not being able to finish their homework, but to rejoice that they didn't have to hand in homework tomorrow. As for the complaints you mentioned. Saying this, Audiobook was silent for a moment. He knew that the complaints Zhong Lang was talking about were definitely real. Because he had been involved in all kinds of major events in the last 2 months, Audiobook's popularity had been rising too quickly. All the major newspapers were scrambling to report news about him and related deeds. There was one every 2 days, basically without a break. Furthermore, Audiobook's position was related to education, so he needed news full of positive energy and worth learning from. These days, when one or two good-looking young men or women appeared in the various border defense forces, military camps, and traffic police teams, they would compete to be featured in the headlines and trending searches. It fully stimulated the people's enthusiasm to join the army. By the same logic, Secretary Da Kong, the highest leader of the Alliance of 10,000 Schools, also believed that a role model should be promoted in the field of education, with more publicity, more reporting, and a spokesperson for education. And Audiobook was a very good tool to use. Moreover, when it came to looks, Audiobook actually wasn't bad. Although he couldn't be compared to those movie stars, his face was still fair and clean. He had a natural scholarly look, pure and untainted. For a government agency like theirs, even if they were from different departments, the competition was still very fierce. When people were at the cusp of the storm, there would always be jealous people who wanted to drag you down. But Audiobook had always felt that reporting was actually reasonable. It could be considered a form of competition, although the methods used were a little underhanded. Audiobook sighed and then smiled. There will definitely be complaints, but they will basically be blocked. They can't be sent in at all. Zhonglang. But 2 days ago, I received a lot. Audiobook. That was arranged by Secretary Da Kong. All the letters of complaint sent to the headquarters will eventually be forwarded to us. The secretary said that this is for internal digestion, and to read more letters of complaint is also a process of self-study and self-reflection. It turned out that this had already been approved long ago. Realization suddenly dawned on Zhonglang. 3 big words emerged in his heart: big boss, society, and can't be provoked. The car slowly approached its destination. The mountain road was located in a remote area, and the driver had in fact already reached the approximate location. But they still took a detour here for a long time. Of course, it was entirely thanks to Loopy Toad's outstanding fluorescent green dog fur that they were able to find Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and the others smoothly in the end. In this dark environment, it looked like a lump of green from a distance, both pleasing to the eye and eye-catching. The headlights of the car were facing the crime scene, and Loopy Toad's eyes were a little uncomfortable, so it simply circled around and hid behind Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Because it noticed that there were other people besides Audiobook, it instantly became a little vigilant. Greetings, Senior Immortal. Audiobook and Zhonglang got out of the car, and Audiobook stepped forward to greet them. It wasn't until then that Zhonglang realized that the person who had exposed this incident this time was actually the famous, Great Death-Courting Senior, in the cultivation circle. Now, Zhonglang understood a little why this matter had caused such a ruckus. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal cupped his fists in return. Hello, Brother Zhua. I'll have to trouble you again this late at night. Zhua. What are you saying, Senior Immortal? I'm already used to it, Loopy Toad. Zhonglang. Zhua. But can Senior Immortal tell me what on earth happened? Previously, he had only given him a location, and Audiobook actually wasn't very clear about the whole story from beginning to end. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal pointed at the young man lying on the ground. Do you see this person? His background is very unusual, but he's no less a first-class criminal than the old devil. He's committed countless crimes, and his cultivation is even higher than the old devil's. He has a very deep connection with General E. Hearing this, Audiobook and Zhonglang's faces turned pale. To be able to have a connection with the 10 founding generals, it was obvious how deep the waters behind this were. Furthermore, there was one thing that both Audiobook and Zhonglang were extremely astonished. This young man's cultivation was even higher than the old devil's? Audiobook sucked in a cold breath. Senior Immortal. This person is peak true immortal? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal nodded. That's right, and he has already cultivated a heavenly Tao. Although your Shifu confiscated it. Ling Zhenren's warm reminder. Students who haven't finished their winter break homework, hurry up. Chapter 448. He had already cultivated the heavenly Tao. Both Audiobook and Zhonglang had stupefied expressions on their faces. Although they were only at the gold core stage, it did not mean that they did not know what the heavenly Tao meant. This was something that could only be touched upon after becoming a perfected immortal. Even many soul formation cultivators felt a deep sense of distance from it, let alone them. Looking at the young man lying dead on the ground, he looked around and realized that his Shifu Wang Ling wasn't here. However, the location had indeed been personally sent over by his master. Thus, Audiobook quickly came to a conclusion. Combined with what grenade-throwing senior immortal had said before, if this young man was a true immortal big shot who had already cultivated a heavenly Tao. Given grenade-throwing senior immortal's strength, there was no way he could have dealt with him, so it was very likely that Shifu had left after defeating the young man, leaving grenade-throwing senior immortal behind to help Wang Ling deal with the aftermath. Audiobook knew that his Shifu liked to keep a low profile, so every time he cleaned up some evil force, he would immediately call him over to deal with the aftermath and then give all the credit to him. But here came the problem. This was a true immortal big shot. Even if Wang Ling, Zhonglang and grenade-throwing senior immortal were added to the mix, if the three of them ran into a cultivator big shot of this level, wouldn't they be killed with one slap? Looking at the young man on the ground, Audiobook felt his balls ache. This was not a good scapegoat. Since he was a scapegoat, the way he did it had to be scientific. Audiobook remembered that the last time they had captured the master of Immortal Mansion, the other party had been an itinerant immortal, but in any case, all the experts in the chat group had joined forces to besiege him. Although there seemed to be a slight disparity in strength, at least it wouldn't be too abrupt. But now, a true immortal big shot had been defeated just like that. If it was only because the three of them had worked together to defeat it, it would be hard to convince the crowd. What is Brother Zhuo worried about? Zhonglang asked. I've thought about it. It's not very appropriate for us to interfere in this matter publicly. Audiobook rubbed his chin and said, How about this? Little Zhong, contact Warden Liang for me and let him handle this. Zhonglang nodded obediently. Yes, Brother Zhuo. It can be said that Brother Zhuo played a huge role in catching such a vicious criminal. Why would you push the blame onto someone else? Grenade-throwing senior immortal smiled. Audiobook sighed. This walk is too heavy, grenade-throwing senior immortal. To put it bluntly, it was still a problem of the difference in their realms. Audiobook was actually quite a self-aware person. There were some scapegoats he could take and some he couldn't. When he could be half as strong as his master, he would be able to take the blame. But right now, he was actually feeling a little diffident. But then again, true monarch, I don't feel any spiritual power from this person. Is he really that strong? Audiobook asked. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Brother Zhuo, there's no need to worry. This person has already sealed his spirit, and is now no different from an ordinary person. He could arrest them without worry. If he was really worried, he could request the higher-ups to use the spirit shackles. Also, I suggest that Brother Zhuo contact General Yi to handle this matter. Audiobook nodded. Senior Immortal is right. After all, it involved the 10 founding generals, so he had to be careful. But true sovereign, come to think of it. Who exactly is this person? 10-meter sword god Chen Nanxian, self-proclaimed, evil sword god. Realization dawned on Audiobook and Zhonglang's faces. Whoosh! Grenade-throwing senior immortal was also very surprised. You've actually heard of him? Audiobook, no. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. It actually made sense that they didn't know evil sword god. After all, it had already been a long time, and evil sword god's identity was directly related to General Yi's. Thus, while the higher-ups had been secretly searching for clues on evil sword god all this time, the news that had been circulating in the media as well as the reports on evil sword god back then had already been sealed. Grenade-throwing senior immortal believed that if he went to the library now, the daily newspaper that had published evil sword god's exploits back then would definitely be gone. Audiobook and Zhonglang were still very young, so it was normal that they didn't know. Furthermore, grenade-throwing senior immortal felt that even if evil sword god was mentioned in the chat group, there wouldn't be many people who would have a rough idea. If Taoist Guang hadn't personally fought him back then, grenade-throwing senior immortal's lead on evil sword god would have been limited to that newspaper from back then. But after today's incident, grenade-throwing senior immortal started to have a whole new understanding of the gap between realms. Evil sword god was really too ferocious. If Taoist Guang hadn't been a true immortal back then, it would have been hard for him to escape. By the time Audiobook arrived, it was already close to 10 o'clock. After that, grenade-throwing senior immortal and Audiobook dealt with evil sword god's matter until the latter half of the night. Songhai First Prison. Warden Liang and his men had escorted evil sword god here overnight. Because of the world-annihilating sword's spirit sealing effect, evil sword god had been unconscious all this time. Warden Liang had directly put him in spirit shackles and sent him to the special cell. The cell door opened,
and 2 prison guards carried evil sword god in one after the other.
Warden Liang followed behind, sighing in his heart. In less than a few months, this was already the 3rd one. Warden Liang looked at Devil Emperor Guapai, who was meditating, and Cheng Yu, the master of a mortal mansion. They had caught a Fatan before, then an archer, and now this new warrior. Oh my! The lineup for the team battle was almost complete. Warden Liang felt that he could perhaps apply for some funding to expand the special cell. The old devil and Cheng Yu, the master of a mortal mansion, were still in trial. It seemed like they had been in custody for a long time, but in fact, they had only been in prison for less than 2 months. In the end, before they could get used to it, a new one had arrived.
Old Liang, who's this? The old devil looked up and sneered when he saw that a new person had been sent in.
He was still using Zhang Liuyue's body, and when he spoke, his aged voice was out of place. But that couldn't be helped, because the old devil was now wearing the spirit shackles, and it was impossible for him to switch his body back while his spirit was sealed. Furthermore, the higher-ups were afraid that something might happen if they removed the spirit seal and replaced the old devil with an artificial body, so they could only make do with it for now. As for the master of Shadow Stream Zhang Liyue, her soul had already been transferred from the stone ghost mask to the artificial body. She would soon be locked up in this special cell. Soon, there would be another assassin in the lineup for the team battle. No comment for the time being, but I advise you not to provoke him. Warden Liang raised his hand and had someone put Evil Sword God on an empty bed. The 2 of you behave. After that, he left with several prison guards, and with a bang, the cell door was firmly shut. 2 minutes later, Cheng Yu raised his eyes and glanced at the old devil next to him. Devil Emperor, what do you say?
The old devil chuckled.
Of course we have to wake him up. For every newcomer who had just been sent to prison, training was an essential process. On this side, Evil Sword God was still unconscious. 2 figures approached from the left and right in the special cell. Then there were 2 crisp, pa-pa sounds. Chapter 449. Although Evil Sword God had been arrested, given his identity, the matter had been suppressed in the end. As for the abnormal large-scale power outage in the area and the malfunctioning of electronic equipment, Songhai City's Electric Power Bureau finally took responsibility for it. The next day, the accident notice posted clearly stated that the cause of the outage was an equipment error. In the end, only those who had personally been involved would know what had really happened. That night, not long after Evil Sword God had been taken into custody, Audiobook received calls from 2 people. The first was from his old leader, Secretary Dakong. Hello, little Zhuazi. Audiobook had already been overwhelmed by the old secretary's familiar address at the beginning, but now he was completely used to it. Audiobook nodded. It's me, Secretary. On the other end of the line, Secretary Dakong's tone was a little meaningful. I've always felt that you had an expert lurking around you. This time, you were able to capture Evil Sword God completely. Audiobook was stunned when he heard this. If Shifu knew that he hadn't taken responsibility for this, he would definitely hate him. Secretary Dakong, it's not like that. Audiobook was about to defend himself when Secretary Dakong's voice rang out again on the other end of the line. Don't be afraid. As long as you can contribute to society, I don't care if you have 1 or 2 experts by your side. But to be able to capture this Evil Sword God, I'm afraid that the senior you invited definitely isn't weak, and might not be weaker than me or Oldie at all. Secretary, All right, no need to explain anymore. I understand you. On the other end of the line, Secretary Dakong nodded slightly and said unhurriedly, Everyone has secrets, and people without secrets can't live on. You've won glory for our educational cause, and now you're a role model for all children. I should be the one thanking you for this. Later if Oldie calls, directly push it to me and say that I was the one who invited the senior behind you. That way, he won't run his mouth behind my back. Listening to the phone, Audiobook suddenly felt a little stupefied. It had originally seemed like something that couldn't be explained clearly, but had actually been inexplicably resolved just like that. Given Old Yi's temperament, I'm guessing that he definitely won't be able to resist coming to Songhai City when he hears about this. He might even call you. Let's get this straight first. This is more important. Old Yi is a very shrewd person. At this point, Secretary Dakong couldn't help but laugh out loud. Previously, he, Old Jiang, and I made a bet to see who could catch Chen Nanxian first. In the end, I never thought that I would be the one who picked it up. Little Zhuozi, you've made me proud again. Audiobook, Secretary Dakong. Moreover, you did one detail very well this time. It was to suppress the media at the first instance and not alarm those people. It's better for old E to handle the matter of evil sword god himself. Little Zhuozi, don't worry. Although there was no news exposure this time, there would definitely be a lot of internal commendations. If you rise to our alliance of 10,000 schools in the future, if old E is willing to put in a good word for you, it'll be quite a big deal. Yes, Secretary. Audiobook thanked him and hung up. He couldn't help taking out a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his sweat. He was sitting at home, but the pot fell from the sky. It turned out that he didn't have the right to decide whether he would take the blame or not, because it was predestined. Which sky had it fallen from? Not long after Secretary Dakong hung up, another phone rang in the staff apartment where Audiobook was staying. The number showed that it was an unknown number, but when Audiobook saw the caller ID, he already knew that it was most likely General E calling. To be honest, he and General E had actually met once at the military training exercise for the 6 schools, but General E hadn't been very familiar with Audiobook at that time. This was a hero who had founded the nation back then, and a legendary existence who had single-handedly fended off a demon god. In fact, he was already indifferent to a lot of things. It was impossible for an ordinary junior to curry favor with him. So this phone call was in fact an opportunity. But right now, Audiobook's priority was to take the blame for Shifu. Making Shifu happy was his top priority. Although he hadn't learned anything from Shifu yet, with this master-disciple relationship, Audiobook felt that it was only a matter of time. From the very beginning, Audiobook had already thought this through. Audiobook picked up the phone. Compared with Secretary Dakong's usual matchmaking tone, General Yi's voice sounded deeper and more serious. Are you Audiobook? Audiobook nodded. I am. On the other end of the line, General E was silent. Dakong is your Shifu? Audiobook. General E, you misunderstand. We're just a leader and subordinate. General E couldn't help sking. Then why does he treat you like he treats his disciple? If this old man hadn't looked into your background, I would have almost thought you were his illegitimate child. Audiobook's face twitched. Getting down to business, General E cleared his throat. This old man just received a call from him saying that you've captured my long-lost junior brother who has been on the run for many years? Is this true? In fact, the moment he had received the call, General E hadn't really dared believe it, because no one knew his junior brother better than he did. He was vicious and merciless, and had killed his Shifu with his own hands. Back then, his junior brother's strength had already been very terrifying. Now, after disappearing for several hundred years, he had suddenly been captured, which made General E very suspicious. Audiobook, General E, the news of evil sword god's capture is true. The heaven-cleaving sword in his hand has already been taken as evidence, and General E can personally verify it. Very well, this old man can tell at a glance whether the heaven-cleaving sword is real or fake. I'll set off for Songhai City tomorrow. We'll see for ourselves then. On the other end of the line, General E said, but this old man still has a question. Audiobook, please speak, General. General E, I heard that you're the direct leader in this matter. Then can you tell this old man? How was my stupid junior brother defeated? I hope you're not trying to deceive me. I've already put a curse on this phone. If you hide anything, for the next 6 months, every time it rains, you'll feel an unbearable itch all over your body. To be honest, Audiobook breathed a sigh of relief at this question. Because General E was asking how evil sword god had been defeated, not who had defeated him. As long as he didn't expose Wang Ling, Audiobook felt that it was perfectly fine. In fact, he hadn't seen the battle with his own eyes, and had instead heard everything from Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. He just wanted to hear the truth. Recalling Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's account of the battle, Audiobook replied, General E, it's like this. First he was slapped twice in the face. After that, he was stuck with a big magic sword. And then, that's all. Chapter 450. July 11th, the 12th Tuesday of the semester. It had been more than 10 hours since Evil Sword God had been officially detained. When Wang Ling got home from school, he set out a brush, a talisman seal, cinnabar and other tools specially used for making talismans on his desk. He had withdrawn evil sword god's power of sword Dao, but that didn't mean it had disappeared. Wang Ling's special characteristic of the great sword Dao spell was all-knowing, while evil sword god's special characteristic was 10-meter sword circle. In terms of the quality of the characteristics, the one Wang Ling had mastered was undoubtedly the best. However, evil sword god's 10-meter sword circle actually wasn't weak. At least in close combat, it could greatly enhance his strength and make him invincible. It was evil sword god's bad luck this time to run into him. Otherwise, Wang Ling felt that even evil sword god's senior brother, General Yi, might not be able to take him down with just the 10-meter sword circle. The talisman he was going to draw this time was an inheritance talisman, which could incorporate the great sword Dao spell, which he had taken from evil sword god previously. This was a type of legendary talisman, and there were almost no records of it in the world's ancient books. It was originally used to pass on the 3,000 Great Daos. Standing in front of his desk, Wang Ling was very seriously drawing a talisman with a brush. Crouching in the chair Wang Ling was sitting in, Loopy Toad also watched intently. Beside the table, there was also a short sheep. Inheritance talisman. Loopy Toad had never seen this kind of Dao talisman before, and it was extremely difficult to draw it. Even a professional talisman master would have a very low success rate. Almost negligible. After all, this was a special talisman used to inherit the 3,000 Great Dao, not a skill scroll in the common sense. It was definitely not that convenient. What's this for? Loopy Toad squatted on a chair and blinked. Wang Ling ignored him and concentrated on drawing the talisman. On the side, Sheep raised an eyebrow and looked at Loopy Toad. Obviously, it was drawn for you. Loopy Toad was startled. It never thought that its little master would actually pass on to it the sword Dao that he had taken from evil sword god. But I don't know how to use a sword. Loopy Toad sweated. It wasn't convenient for it to hold a sword with its dog paws, unless it could cultivate into a human form. However, the problem was that it had just entered the 2nd grade. It would still take a long time before it could leap to the 1st grade. From the 2nd stage to the 1st stage, there was a stage where the beast would transform into a human form, which was equivalent to the soul formation stage in the realm of spirit beasts. In the end, the beast would need to successfully pass the tribulation before it could cultivate to the 1st stage. Loopy Toad calculated its current cultivation progress. Even if it used the improved version of the Demon King Heart Sutra to speed up its cultivation, it would still take at least 50 years of hard cultivation without any assistance. 50 years to go from rank 2 to rank 1, this could already be considered as exceeding speed. If a normal spirit beast wanted to cultivate from grade 2 to grade 1, it would take at least 1,000 years. The improved version of the Demon King Heart Sutra had already increased its speed by a full 20 times. Logically speaking, Loopy Toad was already quite content. It wasn't profound sage tyrannical song. Very quickly, Wang Ling finished drawing the Dao talisman and looked up at Loopy Toad. Of course he was aware of Loopy Toad's concerns. But he actually felt that most people had misconceptions about Sword Dao. True Sword Dao didn't necessarily require one to wield a sword. In his previous battle with Evil Sword God had thought that the highest realm of Sword Dao was becoming one with the sword. But in fact that wasn't the case. Each of the 3,000 Great Dao had its own many characteristics, and according to each person's different comprehension, these characteristics were divided into many types. Characteristics were characteristics. Realm was realm. Profound meaning was profound meaning. The highest realm of Sword Dao was Traceless Heart Sword, followed by Becoming One with the Sword. No sword in the hand, but a sword in the heart. This was the highest realm of Sword Dao. But very few people in the world could grasp this realm. Everyone grasped different characteristics of Sword Dao, but if you were skilled in cultivation, you could ultimately reach the level of Becoming One with the Sword, or even Traceless Heart Sword. Then you could actually grasp the supreme profound meaning of Sword Dao, the world-annihilating sword. So in fact, whether it was Wang Ling or Jinka, both of them could use the world-annihilating sword independently. When fighting Evil Sword God, Jinka had chosen to become one with Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal first before using the world-annihilating sword. That was also Wang Ling's decision. To put it bluntly, it was all for Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's sake. Wang Ling gave the inheritance talisman to Loopy Toad and told it to stick it on its forehead whenever it had nothing to do. The art of Sword Dao was very complicated, but with the inheritance talisman, there was nothing to be afraid of.
It could absorb a little every day, and sooner or later, it would be able to master it all.
Do I really want to learn it? Loopy Toad took the inheritance talisman, feeling very puzzled. It was only at second class. At best, it was at the nascent soul stage.
At the very least, the 3,000 Great Tao was something that only peak true immortals could touch.
Wasn't it a little too early to learn it now?
Sheep crouched down and rubbed Loopy Toad's fur. The 3,000 Great Tao are difficult to comprehend.
Actually, anyone can master it. Why do you think I can run so fast? Loopy Toad was instantly speechless. After hearing Sheep's words, it seemed to understand a little.
The gremlins in the villa who had been enlightened by Little Master Ling actually didn't have high realms, but each of them had actually mastered at least one of the 3,000 Great Tao.
Wang Ling had enlightened them and directly passed them on to them.
Sheep, for example, was only at the soul formation stage, but she had mastered the Great Wind Movement technique. Lord Ma, who had the highest realm and was the only itinerant immortal in the villa who Wang Ling had directly enlightened, had mastered the Great Devouring spell. The 3,000 Great Taos were things that could only be naturally comprehended when one reached a certain level of cultivation. Moreover, they were extremely difficult to comprehend, and many people flocked to them like ducks. However, it was naturally a different story if one had an inheritance.
Sheep, since Little Master gave it to you, just accept it.
Loopy Toad. But I don't have a sword.
Sheep. Don't you still have claws?
Loopy Toad. That night, an old man with a white hedgehog head appeared at the entrance to Songhai First Prison.
As usual, he was dressed in a training suit with a red belt. Moreover, he didn't like to walk properly.
His feet were a few inches off the ground, and his whole body seemed to be floating.
Huh.
At the entrance of the prison guard saw that there seemed to be someone in front of the door, so he opened a small window to take a look.
In the end, the prison guard's face instantly beaded with sweat. General E?
General E nodded and gave a soft sound.
Open the door.
Logically speaking, the warden's personal approval was usually required to enter a prison. If General E was coming, there was no way Warden Liang wouldn't know. The prison would definitely have made preparations in advance. Unless General E had dropped by in person without any prior notice. The prison guard couldn't help thinking of the criminal whom Warden Liang had personally detained in the special prison cell in the early hours of this morning.
It was likely that General E had come for that criminal.
How could someone who could be locked up with the old devil and Cheng Yu, the master of a mortal mansion, be an ordinary person? The prison guard felt that it was inconceivable that General E would actually come in person.
Chapter 451.
At this time, Warden Liang should have already gotten off work and gone home, but he didn't dare because he had received a call earlier from Audiobook saying that General E would be coming over, but the problem was that General E hadn't given him an exact time. Therefore, he had no choice but to wait here, causing him to be restless for the entire day. But it could also be seen that General E really wanted to deal with this matter in a low-key manner and didn't want it to get out. At the same time, Warden Liang was also very puzzled. Was this young man being detained really evil sword god? He didn't dare believe it. After all, this was a figure who had been rumored to be the #1 evil devil before the old devil. After personally killing his Shifu back then, evil sword god's fame had already spread far and wide in the cultivation circle of the older generation. In the hundreds of years that followed, evil sword gods seemed to have faded out of the limelight. But the truth was that there were several cases of swordsmanship experts being mysteriously killed all over the country every year. These cases all had one thing in common. All the victims had died from the same kind of sword qi. To this day, these cases were all open and on file. Those who were familiar with evil sword god would naturally be able to deduce who on earth was responsible for the deaths of these swordsmanship experts. General E had never stopped looking for his stupid junior brother in the last 100 years. But evil sword god was really too cunning. After playing hide and seek for 100 years, he had suddenly been caught. Anyone would feel their scalp go numb. This was evil sword god. How could he be so easy to deal with? As the main person in charge of this case, Audiobook had already given a clear official answer as to who had captured evil sword god. Evil sword god had been arrested by a great senior whom Secretary Dakong had invited. Based on Warden Liang's many years of experience, this kind of ambiguous answer was definitely an exaggeration. Half true, half false. While he was thinking, the prison guard at the door made an internal call.
Warden Liang immediately knew that it was most likely General Yi, and he picked up the phone. Have General Yi wait in the inner hall first, then notify the supervision department and have them bring him over. The prison guard nodded.
Yes.
Suddenly, Warden Liang seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly asked, "By the way, help me ask the other two people in the special cell how they are now." The old devil and the master of Immortal Mansion Chang Yu had been sent to solitary confinement for beating up evil sword god in the prison cell. If there were no accidents, Warden Liang reckoned that the two of them were currently planting vegetables in the prison's backyard. They would only be done after planting 10,000 seeds. Both of them were now wearing spirit shackles, so they could not circulate their spiritual power normally. They were no different from ordinary people. It was actually quite difficult to plant 10,000 seeds. Although Warden Liang couldn't verify whether this young man who had been captured was the real evil sword god. If he really was, there was no way he, the warden, wouldn't just put on a show. It was true that evil sword god had done a lot of evil, but when all was said and done, he could be considered a backdoor entrant. Not long after General Yi arrived in the main hall of the prison, Warden Liang had already arrived with a team of people, followed by a dozen or so prison officers. It looked very ostentatious.
Greetings, General Yi.
The moment he saw the old man with the hedgehog head, Warden Liang immediately smiled. General Yi nodded, floated down on a chair, and crossed his arms. Don't stand on ceremony. Dismiss the people behind you first, and then show this old man the evidence you obtained last night.
Very well.
With a wave of his hand, Warden Liang dismissed the people behind him, then took out the evidence bag and directly took out the heaven-cleaving sword. General Yi took the sword and narrowed his eyes as he examined it carefully. To be honest, the moment Warden Liang had taken the heaven-cleaving sword out of the evidence bag, General Yi had already known in his heart that this sword was definitely real. Not to mention the fact that this sword now looked exactly the same as the one in his memory back then. The sword chi lingering around it also made him feel extremely nostalgic. It's actually the real heaven-cleaving sword. General Yi muttered in his heart. Warden Liang noticed the subtle change in General Yi's expression. General Yi, is there a problem with this sword?
No, this sword is genuine.
It is indeed the one in this old man's memory. Back then, my Shizuan sword Immortal Fan Rue used this sword, General Yi answered truthfully. He raised his head and looked at Warden Liang. Did that young man have a tattoo on his body when he was caught?
I've already examined him.
He was clean from head to toe, and didn't have any tattoos. Warden Liang shook his head. But what? General Yi frowned. Warden Liang said, according to Director Zhua's description, the tattoos on this person's body only disappeared after he was defeated. Before that, not only did this young man have tattoos, he also had dark eyeshadow. Hearing this, the corners of General Yi's mouth couldn't help twitching. Hearing this, he was already 70% sure that this young man was without a doubt his stupid junior brother. The reason why the heaven-cleaving sword was so strong was because it contained the attribute of darkness and chaos. General Yi remembered that his Shizuan sword Immortal Fan Rue had expended a lot of effort to subdue it back then. Thinking this, General Yi said faintly, in order to seize this sword back then, my junior brother Evil Sword God didn't hesitate to use a forbidden spell to forcibly change the contract. In the end, he was invaded by the heaven-cleaving sword's power of darkness and chaos, causing him to turn black. Tattoos and eyeshadow are his hallmarks. Warden Liang, is the person inside really Evil Sword God? It shouldn't be wrong, General Yi sighed. Although this junior brother of mine used to be an arrogant person, he definitely wasn't someone who would willfully kill the innocent. Now that I think about it, he already had a plan to seize the sword from the hostage case back then, and he didn't even know that the power of darkness and chaos had entered his body. Saying this, General Yi floated up from his chair and looked at Warden Liang. Let's go, you lead the way. This old man is going to see him. In the meantime, I'll do a final verification. A few minutes later, the two of them appeared in the special prison cell. The young man who had been unconscious earlier had already woken up. Seeing that someone had come, he had a terrified and uneasy expression on his face as he cowered in a corner and trembled. Who are you? Why did you capture me? My Shifu. My Shifu is Sword Immortal Fan Rue. The young man screamed in alarm. Outside the prison, General Yi narrowed his eyes.
How long has he been like this?
Warden Liang replied. He's been like this since he woke up.
Director Zhua was here before, and said that evil sword god's appearance is completely different from when he was in battle. I had someone examine him, and the initial suspicion is that he has a split personality. General Yi nodded. Then I'll test him. As soon as he said this, General Yi directly threw the heaven-cleaving sword in his hand over.
Warden Liang broke out in a sweat.
General Yi, this. General Yi pinched his mustache.
Don't be nervous. He's wearing spirit shackles and can't use spirit energy.
After a few minutes or so, the young man cowering in the corner finally plucked up his courage and picked up the heaven-cleaving sword from the ground. Then, Warden Liang felt as if evil sword god had become a different person as he pointed the sword at himself and General Yi and laughed loudly.
Yi Jian Chuan. I, evil sword god, am here. If you have the guts, let me go. I want to fight you to the death.
Fight you to the death. Fight you to the death. Fight you to the death. Fight you to the death. One male and one female. Male and female. Male and female.
Warden Liang was stupefied. At the same time, General Yi couldn't help smacking his forehead when he heard this. While he had been verified, he also felt utterly ashamed. Chapter 452. General Yi covered his face.
This was really too shameful. With a crook of his finger, he withdrew the heaven-cleaving sword. The young man, who had initially been wild and arrogant when he held the sword, turned back into a timid and fearful look as he trembled in a corner. There was no trace of the first-generation evil sword god at all.
Warden Liang.
General Yi. Is this what evil sword god looks like when he's in his normal state?
General Yi cupped his chin and shook his head.
No, my feeling is that these two personalities are both very extreme.
If he's a completely normal junior brother, he should be somewhere in between them.
Although he usually exudes a shameless and arrogant aura, my junior brother would never be so cowardly, nor would he make trouble out of nothing. Therefore, whether he is holding a sword or not, this old man feels very strange.
Warden Liang sighed.
That's right.
What's right? General Yi was puzzled.
Warden Liang. To tell you the truth, it was Immortal Toya who did the personality test for evil sword god this time. Director Zhua specially contacted Immortal Toya and specially rushed here from Chrysanthemum Island.
Immortal Toya's final conclusion is completely consistent with General Yi's feeling.
General Yi nodded and asked, then did he say what treatment he had?
Warden Liang. Immortal Toya said, mental illness needs mental medicine. Mental illness can't be cured by medicine. At most, medicine can only play a supporting role in calming the nerves. In this world, there is no pharmacist who can completely cure split personality disorder. But
I feel that Immortal Toya is hiding something about this matter, and perhaps it's inconvenient for him to tell me.
General Yi nodded.
Warden Liang had been the head of Songhai First Prison for several hundred years, and was better at reading people's expressions than anyone else. When a person was hiding something, he could actually tell from their expressions. General Yi was also quite convinced of Immortal Toya's medical skills. Back then, the Toya clan had been world famous for their medical skills, which weren't inferior to the Shao clans at all. Furthermore, as far as General Yi knew, Immortal Toya was probably the only heir to the Toya clan's 9 cycles exquisite pagoda. This was the Toya clan's ancestral magic treasure, and a quasi-world-defying magic artifact. Not only did the 9 cycles exquisite pagoda contain the entire Toya clan's lifelong research on medicine, it was also a very powerful sealing magic artifact. But General Yi had heard that this magic weapon had been severely damaged in a great battle with the Toya clan a long time ago, and was still in the process of being repaired. When General Yi had first come into contact with Immortal Toya, he had old Tang secretly investigate the matter of the 9 cycles exquisite pagoda being damaged, and he had learned some things from there. Even so, General Yi knew very little about the real cause of the 9 cycles exquisite pagoda's damage. There was even less news about it in the outside world. Of course, General Yi had his own speculations. He felt that this matter might have something to do with the fact that the Toya clan, which had been at its peak back then, had suddenly taken a sharp turn for the worse, causing the family to decline later on. General Yi crossed his arms and floated in the air as he said in a deep voice, "If it was Immortal Toya who did the appraisal, then this old man has no doubt about it. As for whether or not there is a way to cure my junior brother's split personality, this old man will definitely find an opportunity to personally ask." Warden Liang. Then evil sword god, may I ask General E, how should this subordinate deal with him?
General E smiled. Don't get me wrong. I'm not your superior. This old man is here purely as a prison visitor to see my stupid junior brother. Warden Liang should know better than I do what you should do. In 4 words. Do business as usual. This old man never bends the law for personal gain. Warden Liang, you should be clear-headed.
Warden Liang nodded solemnly and replied loudly, of course.
Rest assured, General, I will definitely handle this impartially. On the other side, while General E was visiting the prison, Wang Ling waited for the results of Wang Ming's space survey and pondered a way to help Taoist Guang restore his body. At the moment, it was possible to use spirit lotus roots to create a body for a golden core cultivator's body. The delivery workers who had suffered at the hands of the old devil were a good example. Wang Ling had paid special attention to this matter. With grenade-throwing senior immortals' help and after negotiating with the insurance company, this group of unlucky delivery workers had their bodies reconstructed. Moreover, through this incident, this group of delivery men became famous on the internet. In the end, this group of delivery men formed a male idol group called Lotus Tyrant and embarked on the road of pursuing their dreams in the entertainment industry. But the method to reconstruct a body at the true immortal stage was clearly much more complicated than that at the golden core stage. For example, the old devil had tried to use the almighty skeleton he had found in conjunction with the transformation array to reconstruct his body. However, this method was also very risky, and the chances of success and failure were 50-50. If it failed, the skeleton that had been so hard to find would directly disappear. Of course, there was more than one way to reconstruct a body at the true immortal stage. Wang Ling felt that he still needed to think about it at length. At that moment, Wang Ling looked at the time. It was still within range of Taoist Guang's live stream. When Wang Ling opened the live stream room, the number of viewers had already exceeded 2 million. It had doubled again. Furthermore, Wang Ling realized that while Taoist Guang hadn't signed a contract yet, his real name had already been verified, and fans could openly send him gifts. As soon as he entered the live stream room, Wang Ling heard Taoist Guang's gratitude. Thank you, Light Chaser Fantasy A Gue, for the 5 flying swords. Thank you, Red Sea Action is so good. For the 10 immortal boats. Thank you, Legend Loves Lowly, for the 999 broken tyrant immortal swords. Thank you, school is about to start but what if I haven't finished my homework? For the 66 primordial black crystals. Wang Ling. Taoist Guang had already played grenade-throwing senior immortals recommendation of PlayerUnknown's Battleground, and was now waiting for the game interface. This was often the time for live streamers to talk and chat. Scanning the bullet messages at random, Taoist Guang selected a netizen's question and read it aloud. Lord Island, what do you think of Nanhan Country's whistleblowing incident? Taoist Guang couldn't help letting out a hiss as he felt that this question was a little sharp. After he read the question, someone immediately picked up the pace in the bullet messages, and countless bullet messages floated by. The Koreans were also decent people when they were alive. Let's be more civilized and burn incense first. Do you even need to ask? Of course it's to spit. Looking at the bullet messages, Taoist Guang couldn't help laughing. Calm down, everyone. Our phlegm is precious, don't spit it casually. A lot of people sent question marks in the bullet messages. Taoist Guang laughed. For example, even if I save my phlegm for Grandpa Lu, I won't give it to those Koreans. Chapter 453. Wang Ling actually didn't pay much attention to games, because in his opinion, all games were pretty boring. Some civilian players who used up all their free time to create their own characters might not even be able to beat someone else's 6 yuan top-up gift bag. Money should be spent wisely. Only a meticulous life could be called a life. For example, Father Wang would use all kinds of small reasons to dock his pocket money behind his back, which Wang Ling felt was indeed pretty miserable. Furthermore, Father Wang and Mother Wang had already made an agreement with him long ago that he wasn't allowed to use his cultivation skills to earn extra money. Wang Ling understood this principle. On one hand, it was to keep a low profile, and on the other hand, Father and Mother Wang's only requirement of him at this stage was that he study hard. This was what a 16-year-old teenager should do. So a few times before, Wang Ling had asked for free delivery. Was that really stingy? Did he really care about that bit of money?
It was all for the sake of being meticulous so that he could save money to buy practice questions and study hard, and when he succeeded in his studies in the future, he could give back to society. It was like what he had said before.
Money should be spent wisely. Money should be spent wisely when playing games. Except for crispy noodle snacks in the game store. Money should be spent wisely when buying snacks. Except for crispy noodle snacks. Money should be spent wisely when drinking drinks. Except for crispy noodle snacks. But even if Wang Ling didn't play games much, young people were certainly more receptive to new things than the elderly. Daoist Guang had only just learned how to use a computer, and there were actually a lot of things he was still figuring out. Compared with a lot of professional players, Daoist Guang was actually very clear about his own position. He was an entertainment live streamer who was working hard to improve his skills. Through the screen full of bullet messages, Wang Ling could naturally tell that a lot of newcomers to the live stream room had heard online about this old man playing games on the island, so they had come out of curiosity to take a look. Actually, a lot of them didn't care how good this Lord Island was at playing games, and had come purely to watch Daoist Guang talk nonsense while playing games. And most importantly, because of the environment, Daoist Guang's live stream had a lot of variety. Between 8 and 10 in the morning was Daoist Guang's deserted island survival time. In the live stream room, he would demonstrate how to create all kinds of fancy survival magic treasures barehanded in a wild environment. It was Daoist Guang's island delicacies time from noon to 2 in the afternoon. In the live stream room, Daoist Guang would demonstrate how to use the food resources on the deserted island to survive. In an environment of survival in the wild, any snake, insect, rat or ant was a rich source of protein. After that, it was Daoist Guang's game time from 6 to 9 o'clock in the evening. There were a lot of audience members recommending other games in the bullet messages, and Daoist Guang very carefully recorded the names of the games they recommended in his notebook, intending to try them out later. While Wang Ling was watching the live stream, it was actually almost time for Daoist Guang to go offline. The last round was extremely poor. When he landed, he found a level 1 bulletproof vest, a level 1 backpack, not even a helmet, a tachi, and 5 bandages. Apart from that, it was empty. Daoist Guang had always been a solo jungler, and never went to big cities to hang out. Daoist Guang felt that it would be safer for an entertaining old man like him to stay on the sidelines as an observer, and this would also depend on his luck. Some of the things he picked up in the wilderness were fat, while others were thin. Like this time, Daoist Guang had clearly entered a house that looked relatively big in the wild, but it was actually extremely poor inside. Some people jeered in the bullet messages. "It's over. It's over. Lord Island is going to donate again. This loot that turns into a box as soon as it lands isn't bad, but Lord Island's luck isn't good." The most flashy thing was that when Daoist Guang picked up the only weapon in the room, the katana, the bullet messages in the live stream room were all the same. Game over. Daoist Guang glanced at the bullet messages and couldn't help laughing. Of course he knew that they were mocking him. There's no time. Looking at the time, Daoist Guang couldn't help muttering in his heart when he realized that there wasn't much time left. Furthermore, he had told the audience in the live stream room earlier that this was the last round. Could it be that he really had to go offline in disgrace? Of course that wasn't going to happen. He had been entertained for almost 3 hours. He had to show off his skills to the audience in the last round. Of course, he couldn't use cheats. Live streaming platforms now had built-in anti-cheating systems, and live streamers who used cheats would be directly banned from live streaming rooms. Lord Island had read the rules before, so he naturally understood this. So he couldn't use cheats. But Daoist Guang felt that he could use a little magic. Holding the tachi in his hand, Daoist Guang pretended to hide in a house, but in fact he was thinking carefully about what kind of magic he should use. The key to playing this type of survival game was to have a clear grasp of the enemy's position as well as his own. For some LYBs in particular, location information was very important. But the game on the computer was just a pile of data, so even if he opened the heavenly eye, he still wouldn't be able to see through things. Let alone sense auras. These were all virtual data, so how could he sense auras? Furthermore, Daoist Guang only had 1 tachi. Unless he could kill someone in the room, he would be a live target outside. After thinking for a while, Daoist Guang pretended to stretch, stuck his hands out of the live stream screen, and secretly made a hand seal to cast the spirit concentration spell on himself. This was just an ordinary little spell,
but it could greatly increase one's concentration without a sound. When all was said and done, even if you could clearly grasp another person's position in this game, when you really ran into them, it was still a competition of instant reaction. Thinking this, Taoist Guang couldn't help laughing in his heart. He didn't know if there were other people who were playing this game with the spirit concentration spell on, but his was at the highest level. Furthermore, he was very confident that as long as he activated this spell, no one in this game would be able to beat him. After all, he deeply believed that there was no true immortal in this world who was more bored than him. At that moment, the sound of a door opening came from downstairs. Taoist Guang was highly focused, and he instantly heard it. Holding the tachi, he stood guard on the second floor as he waited for the player who had invaded the room to climb up the stairs. Before that person could react, he saw a figure floating in front of his eyes. One strike. Half HP. The player panicked as he raised his rifle and fired wildly at the figure. However, Taoist Guang's reaction was too fast, and with a small leap, he was directly behind the player. With a second strike, the player was directly gone. The bullet messages were full of exclamations. WOC. What is that? What? The tachi's damage is so explosive? A draw. Lord Island is definitely a draw this time. Draw +1. Everyone looked at Taoist Guang in the live stream room and saw that his expression was very calm as he confidently fumbled with the box on the ground. This person was very fat. He had a level 3 bag, 3 first aid kits, 2 bottles of drinks, and a level 2 helmet. But after searching for these things, Taoist Guang left straight away. The bullet messages were full of question marks again. Eh? Lord Island isn't picking up a gun? You forgot the automatic rifle. Lord Island. Holding the tachi, Taoist Guang was extremely confident. I'm sorry, Lord Island doesn't need a rifle. Bullet messages. Taoist Guang. The moment I held the tachi, the game was already over. Lord Island, come on. You've killed people before, but you really aren't very strong. Someone couldn't help ridiculing him. Seeing this bullet message, Taoist Guang didn't say anything, but simply turned on the quiz system. In progress, live streamer has killed 20 or more people. Can/can't. Furthermore, Taoist Guang directly changed the room title. Chapter 454. The audience in the live stream room didn't expect Lord Island to actually open a guessing game and even directly change the room title. Katana in hand. Game over. 1/ to kill Peppa Pig. The bullet screen in the live stream room exploded. F***CK. Lord Island. What did Peppa Pig do to you? I Page. Don't know if I should say MMP. Killing 20 with a katana? Lord Island. Do you think this is a knife fight? He's holding a gun. How can you win? Kill 20 or more. Can you or can't you? This is a free point question. It was very obvious that the bullet messages had directly exploded because of Lord Island's domineering guessing game and eye-catching room title. Wang Ling scanned the bullet messages and found that, as expected, most of them were skeptical. There were even live streamers from other rooms who had run over to Taoist Guang's live stream room to drop in, and publicly dissed Taoist Guang for using this room title to attract viewers. But it turned out that this gimmick was really good. The number of viewers in the live broadcast room also increased under the influence of the major anchors visiting and dissing him. It soared from the original 2 million to more than 2.8 million. Among them were Lord Island's light chasers, fans of other live streamers, and even more onlookers who had joined in on the fun. In that instant, Wang Ling suddenly felt that Taoist Guang actually had the talent to be a live streamer. In just a few days, the number of viewers in the live broadcast room had stabilized at more than 2 million, and it was even approaching 3 million. The most important thing was that a large number of new viewers each day were amused by Taoist Guang's live stream and turned into light chasers. On the first day Taoist Guang started live streaming, 800,000 people had already signed up for the 10HNY Light Chaser live streamer card. And now, the number of light chasers had broken through the 1 million mark. Just as Super Chan and Dopey Gua had said at the time, this record had already surpassed the previous record for live streaming platforms in recent years. No new live streamer on any live streaming platform could match Taoist Guang's stats in a week. This was partly due to Taoist Guang's own luck, but of course, it was mostly due to his rapid mastery of live streaming rules. What's the first rule of live streaming? This was interaction.
Interact more with the audience. Make sure to speak in a civilized manner. Make fun of some hot social issues and make up jokes. Then on this basis, he would add live streaming elements so that the old viewers would not feel bored, and at the same time, it would attract more and more new viewers. Daoist Guang had obviously done it. Not only that, Daoist Guang had also learned to use gimmicks to attract an audience. Although the bullet screen in the live broadcast room was now a bit dirty compared to before, there were many voices of doubt, and there were many fans of other live streamers in the live broadcast room sending all kinds of anti-hero bullet screen and war bullet screen. But Wang Ling thought that Daoist Guang wouldn't care in the slightest. After all, he was a true immortal who had cultivated his state of mind for a long time. Daoist Guang wouldn't care in the slightest even if Wang Ling openly cursed him in the live stream room, let alone doubts. After all, when the number of viewers in a live stream increased, it was inevitable that there would be haters. Actually, Wang Ling was quite worried about the personal safety of these trolls. Because trolls had a very big characteristic, which was that they were tyrannical online and cowardly offline. As trolls, they couldn't attack live streamers through network cables and Wi-Fi. But as a true immortal expert, Daoist Guang could easily do this. At that moment, there was a lot of rhythmic sound in the bullet screen. Wang Ling cupped his chin in his hand as he curiously looked on among the melon spectators. Report, report! This live streamer is deliberately trying to attract attention. This one could be considered a good one, but Wang Ling saw even more vicious ones. According to the rules of the live broadcast platform, if a live streamer is judged to be a clickbait, he will be banned for 7 to 15 days as punishment. Everyone, disperse. This live streamer is already dead. Remember to burn incense for the deceased live streamer before you leave. Deceased live streamer? When Daoist Guang saw this bullet screen, he was instantly speechless in his heart. He realized that he actually couldn't refute it. Because in theory, he was indeed already dead. But Daoist Guang didn't ban these doubtful and even jeering bullet screen comments. This was the effect he was after. Sometimes, being doubted wasn't a bad thing. For Daoist Guang, given that he already had a certain fanbase, doubtful voices would only help him expand his fanbase. Daoist Guang looked at the number of viewers in the live stream room. It had been less than 5 minutes since he had changed the title. The number of people in the live stream room had already broken 3 million. This was an unprecedented growth rate. If he could convert a quarter or more of the 1 million new viewers into light chasers, Daoist Guang's goal for today's live stream would be achieved. At that moment, the 5-minute time limit for the first blue circle was up and the map began to shrink until there were only 83 people left. Daoist Guang's luck wasn't bad. Although he didn't need to run from the blue circle, he was still some distance away from the center of the safe zone. If he didn't leave now, the next time the blue circle shrank, the characters he controlled would definitely be poisoned. Furthermore, Daoist Guang had already set a goal of killing 20 or more people. If he wanted to accomplish this, he would have to start a frenzied killing spree. Of the remaining 83 people, he would have to use his katana to kill a quarter of them. Just the thought of this was very difficult. Thus, when Daoist Guang decided to officially make his move, Daoist Guang had already banned the bets. The odds were 1/200. More than 2 million people had taken part in the exciting bet. And most of them chose not to. Of course, there were also gamblers who took the risk. 200 times the odds. It was too tempting. I don't care, I, the light chaser, will support Lord Island. Bet 10,000 immortal pills. My entire fortune. I bet on Lord Island to win. Daoist Guang naturally saw this bullet message. He immediately replied indifferently, Lord Island's marksmanship may indeed need to be improved, but this old man's saber skills won't let you down. Since I've opened the bets, this old man has absolute confidence. For the rest of the live stream, please keep your eyes open and record if you want to. Don't say that I'm using a cheat when I really kill 20 or more people. If a cheat is detected, it's my loss. As soon as Daoist Guang said this, the bullet messages instantly exploded again. He was too confident. At that moment, everyone saw a colorful pinned bullet message in the live stream room. This bullet message was sent by Daoist Guang's #1 fan. Has 3 days and 2 sleeps been updated? It read, the katana is a brand new melee weapon. It's currently the longest of all melee weapons, and it does a lot of damage. But the refresh rate on the map is very low,
and many live streamers may not be able to find it. Everyone, be quiet and watch Lord Island's operation first. During Lord Island's live stream earlier, who present had ever seen him use a katana? Chapter 455. This high-class colorful bullet message lingered on the live stream room for a full 20 seconds before disappearing. Only the #1 fan could enjoy this treatment. Indeed, as this #1 fan had said, the katana was the latest melee weapon in this game, and it dealt extremely high damage. Apart from the head, 2 slashes would empty the HP bar. If you could aim at the head, a helmet would be useless as 1 slash would kill 1 person. Every live streamer had a different way of playing the game. For example, live streamers who were equally good at shooting in this game all used different guns. But even so, a lot of people still felt that this live streamer was a little strange. After all, this was a gun battle game, not Dragon God fighters. What was the saying again? Chopping a wire with a katana, sparks and lightning flashes. This game didn't have a mechanism to break other people's weapons. Why was this live streamer so confident? If someone sniped him from a distance, wouldn't his head be blown off with 1 shot? Although there were a lot of doubts, Daoist Guang had already achieved the effect he had expected. He nodded with satisfaction and concentrated on the screen as he turned on serious mode. The spirit concentration spell continued to work. Although the heavenly eye didn't work on the pile of data in the virtual game, Daoist Guang's eyes could now clearly scan the screen in front of him, as if the image had been broken down into individual pixels. Even if there was a barely visible black dot moving, Daoist Guang could see it. After killing someone in that poor big house on the outskirts and leaving with the medicine, Daoist Guang filled his body with energy and directly ran toward the big house that was still in the safe zone. When the people in the live stream room saw the direction Daoist Guang had chosen, they were all at a loss. It's no use even if the katana's damage is high. There's definitely someone in the city already hiding in a room to snipe you. If you go there, you'll be a live target. Lord Island is a little tough. I thought he would hide in a house to ambush someone. The one above. Even if the ambusher wins in the end, he won't be able to kill 20 people. If he wants to kill more, he has to take the initiative to attack. A lot of people sang the song Cold in their hearts when they saw Daoist Guang's choice. In most people's eyes, this was an impossible task. Daoist Guang wasn't in the mood to pay attention to the bullet messages. He knew that before he killed his opponent, the live stream room would definitely be filled with all kinds of mocking and pessimistic predictions. But it didn't matter, as long as he held a kitchen knife. Oh no, a katana. If he killed a few more people, the doubts would naturally vanish. Of course, Daoist Guang knew that there had to be people in the big city. Moreover, there would definitely be a lot of lobs crouching at the windows of the houses and shooting from the back. So, why did he choose to run in the direction of the big city? Because there were many people in the city. His ultimate goal was to kill at least 20 people. Daoist Guang sprinted forward with a calm expression. Because he was full of energy. His character moved very quickly in the game, and he was only a short distance away from the big city up ahead. But at that moment, he chose to hide behind a big tree. He heard the sound of a motorcycle. And it was very clear that the sound came from the front. Daoist Guang wasn't wearing headphones, and the sound of the game was played externally. Even during the live stream, there was still the sound of the waves nearby. But as a true immortal cultivator, even if the heavenly eye of spirit didn't have any effect on virtual games, in the end, his strong sense of hearing still came in handy. A lot of people didn't understand Daoist Guang's intentions at first, but when they saw the motorcycle coming up ahead, they instantly understood. His hearing is simply terrifying. The live streamer is live streaming on an island and he's not wearing headphones. How did he hear it? New friend, Lord Island's hearing has always been very good. An old viewer who was already a light chaser replied in a bullet message in the live stream room. The motorcycle stopped at a gas station 20 meters in front of the big tree. Daoist Guang confirmed that this person hadn't noticed him. So the moment this person got off the motorcycle and entered the gas station to search for something, he dashed forward like crazy. Audience friends. At that moment, Daoist Guang said as he dashed forward, now it's time to witness Lord Island's, receiving an express delivery. Receive an express delivery? I'm afraid it's a delivery. Shun Feng God Express,
providing the nation's first-rate express delivery service.
Out of the corner of his eye, Taoist Guang glanced at the bullet messages on the side. His heart as calm as an ancient well. Holding his breath, he approached the gas station little by little, lowering the sound of his footsteps as he listened for the specific location of the person inside.
The person was searching the room. This was a small independent supermarket. It wasn't big, but its location wasn't very good. Next to the mini-mart was a small two-story building. This two-story building had been searched. The windows were intact, and the door was tightly shut. Taoist Guang instantly speculated that after this person was done searching the supermarket, he would immediately search the two-story building. Once this person slipped to the second floor with a melee weapon, the chances of him being able to kill him would be much lower. Thus, Taoist Guang immediately decided that he had to kill this person the moment he left the supermarket.
He listened carefully to the person's footsteps in the supermarket as he slowly crept to the side of the supermarket door.
The supermarket's windows were anti-theft, and there was no way to jump out of them. The only way to get out was through the door. Furthermore, this person was very cautious and had even closed the door. This was a great opportunity. At that moment, Taoist Guang heard footsteps start to sound inside, and they were gradually approaching the door. This person was about to come out. Almost the instant the door opened. Even this player himself hadn't expected someone to actually be at the entrance to the supermarket. Furthermore, he wasn't holding a gun. He was squatting at the door with this shining katana. Digging. What kind of operation was this? It was very obvious that this person hadn't reacted at all as he trembled with the UMP9 in his hand. However, thanks to Taoist Guang's spirit concentration spell, coupled with his ability to listen to footsteps, his reaction speed was too fast. Crack! The moment the door opened, the slender and bright katana landed precisely on the person's head. An obvious system kill prompt instantly appeared in the top right corner of the screen. Player DOYE has killed player ClearLove8 with a katana headshot. Under everyone's incredulous gazes, Taoist Guang smoothly achieved a double kill. Wang Ling. There was another explosion of bullet messages. 666. Lord Island is awesome. 666666. This time, it won't be a draw again, right? Lord Island's movements and thoughts are very clear. Just like before, Taoist Guang picked up all the medicine on this person. Currently, he already had 4 first aid kits, 2 energy drinks and 2 painkillers each. Staring at the player's belongings, Taoist Guang pondered for a while, then picked up the frying pan that this person had left behind. Seeing this, someone in the live stream room immediately sent a bullet message. A frying pan. It's a godly weapon. Taoist Guang smiled lightly. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Island will show you how to catch bullets with a frying pan later. Wang Ling. Audience. If he could catch a bullet like that, that would really be abnormal. At that moment, Taoist Guang swept his gaze over the live stream room and noticed that another nouveau riche had gifted him, so he hurriedly thanked him. Thank you, His Majesty the King with blood-stained sanitary pads. For the Spirit Sword Mountain. Although Taoist Guang had killed someone, Wang Ling noticed that there wasn't any joy on his face. Because the second blue circle had already refreshed. During this period of time, the number of people in the upper right corner had decreased sharply again, leaving only 67 people. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.